Welcome to my channel. In my channel, you can watch various type of fiction and fantasy audiobook. If you want more video like this, please subscribe my channel.
I kidnapped a Greek goddess while serving soldier in the Qin Empire. Part 1. My name is Qin Xiaofan. 3 minutes ago, I was still a technician at a construction site, arguing with the foreman. Brother Wang, this concrete grade is definitely not enough. Once it dries, just watch it crack. I didn't finish my sentence. Really, I swear I only said that half sentence. Then I stepped into thin air. The tail end of Foreman Wang's words, "You're the only one who knows anything," still lingered in my ears, and then everything went completely black. When I opened my eyes again, the world had changed. There was only the wind. It scraped across my face like sandpaper. I was lying on the hard, rammed earth. As far as I could see, there were low adobe walls, and a few dusty hemp clothes hung on them. In the corner, a few spears were piled up, the spearheads were rusted, and the wooden shafts were polished until they gleamed. I braced my hands to sit up, feeling a rough texture against my palms. I looked down, and my hands had changed. These were a pair of rough, dark hands, with black mud packed under the fingernails, and several scabbed scars on the backs of the hands. I was wearing the same gray hemp clothes as those hanging on the wall, the coarse fabric rubbed against my skin, causing a stinging itch. I had barely uttered a word before my throat felt dry and painful, as if it had been polished with sandpaper. Qin Xiaofan, still lying there playing dead. A hoarse roar exploded from outside the door. Before I could react, a dark shadow rushed into the cramped adobe hut. It was a burly man with a fleshy face and a scar running from his brow bone to his chin on his left cheek. He was wearing the same hemp clothes as me, but with a simple leather armor over it and a bronze short sword hanging at his waist. He grabbed my collar and lifted me entirely off the ground. That arm strength was definitely enough to carry cement bags at a construction site. "The sun is already high. You slacked off and slept during your shift last night, and now you're missing from morning drills. Do you really think being one of the garrison soldiers is just for enjoyment?" Scarface's spit nearly sprayed onto my face. "You just took 10 lashes of the military cane yesterday, and now you're itching for more today, aren't you?" My mind went blank. Garrison soldiers, military cane, drills. "Big brother, I tried to squeeze out a smile. "Did you mistake me for someone else? My surname is Qin, but my name isn't Xiaofan. I am." "Bullshit." Scarface threw me to the ground. The roster of the border garrison soldiers is written clearly. Qin Xiaofan, 18 years old, from Yueyang, Guangzhong, conscripted for border defense 2 months ago. "Did you run into something evil last night, you brat, that you've even forgotten your own name?" I fell to the ground, and my butt hurt so much I gasped. But my brain hurt even more. The amount of information was too much. My brain was about to burn out. Transmigration. Did I really transmigrate? And I transmigrated into a garrison soldier. A soldier guarding the border. Centurion, this kid is afraid he's truly possessed. Another head poked in from the doorway, with a playful smile on its face. He was guarding the beacon tower last night and said he saw ghost fire. He was so scared he ran back with his tail between his legs, and you punished him with the military cane. Perhaps he was scared out of his wits. The man called Centurion, Scarface, spat. Out of his wits. In my eyes, he's just playing dumb to avoid his duties. Qin Xiaofan, let me tell you, if you dare to slack off again today, it won't be 10 lashes of the military cane, it will be 20. Get up and get to the training field. I scrambled up almost instinctively. A conditioned reflex developed from years of being a corporate slave. When the boss gets angry, first yield, then execute. Yes, I'm going. I patted the dirt off my body while walking out cautiously. Walking out of the adobe hut, the view suddenly opened up. Then, my heart sank to the bottom. This was a camp. A camp so rudimentary it was appalling. Dozens of adobe houses, exactly like the one I had just been in, were scattered chaotically across an open space. In the distance, a winding wall stood between heaven and earth. That was the Great Wall. It wasn't the brick Great Wall from the books I knew, but a wall made of rammed yellow earth. The sky was blindingly blue. The sun had already risen high, baking the ground and sending up waves of heat. The training field was in the center of the camp, a large open area. There were already 30 or 40 people standing there, all wearing dusty hemp clothes, holding spears or carrying crossbows, standing crookedly. Everyone looked at me. Their gazes were varied. Some mocking, some numb, some curious, some gloating. The centurion, I later learned his name was Haifu, but everyone called him Scarface, walked to the front of the line with large strides and pointed at me, roaring, "Do you see? This is the consequence of slacking off." He was guarding the beacon tower last night and abandoned his post. By law, he should be beheaded. Considering it was his first offense, I only punished him with 10 lashes of the military cane. If anyone dares to follow his example today. He glared viciously at the whole group. Everyone will be treated as a deserter and executed on the spot. I lowered my head and walked silently to the end of the line. My butt throbbed faintly. It seemed that the 10 lashes of the military cane were no joke. A young man next to me, who looked only a few years older than me, quietly nudged me with his elbow and lowered his voice. "Xiaofan, are you really okay? When you ran back last night, your face was as white as a dead person's." I glanced at him. This young man had dark skin, but his eyes were quite bright. His name was Xuanzi. He was a garrison soldier who lived in the same room as me, and he was also a fellow townsman from Yueyang. This was information I pieced together from his subsequent chatter. I opened my mouth, not knowing what to say. Should I say I came from 2,000 years later? Should I say I was carrying bricks at a construction site and suddenly dropped here? Should I say I don't even know what dynasty or era this is? I'd probably be treated as a lunatic. Or worse, as a demon. Alright, enough chatter. The roar of Scarface came from the front row. Today's drill, spear formation. Same old rules, 50 charges. Those who are out of sync will have their lunch halved. The formation began to move. A spear was thrust into my hands. It was the same kind with a rusty bronze spearhead I had seen in the room earlier, and the wooden shaft was so smooth it was a bit slippery. I held it clumsily, watching what the people in front were doing. "Raise spears." Scarface gave the order. Everyone raised their spears diagonally upward in unison. I was half a beat slow and hurriedly raised my spear. Charge. The formation began to march forward, thrusting their spears forward into the air as they stepped. The soil was trampled with thudding sounds, and dust flew everywhere. I followed along, but my hands and feet were completely uncoordinated, and I almost poked Xuanzi in front of me several times. "Qin Xiaofan, did you borrow your arms? Put some effort into it." Scarface's roar followed me like a shadow. I gritted my teeth and thrust forward with force. Once, twice, 3 times. Sweat quickly soaked through my coarse hemp clothes. The salt irritated my skin, causing it to itch and burn. The sun was vicious, baking me until I was dizzy. The spear in my hand grew heavier and heavier, as if filled with lead. My arms were so sore they trembled, and every time I raised them, it felt like they were going to dislocate. But I couldn't stop, because Scarface was standing right next to me, staring, his eyes as sharp as a hawk's. 50 charges. By the time it finally ended, I nearly collapsed to the ground. My throat was so dry it felt like it was going to smoke, and my legs were shaking like a sieve. The others were no better off, all panting like oxen and drenched in sweat. "Rest for a quarter of an hour," Scarface announced. "Then practice with the crossbows." The formation instantly loosened up. I leaned against the adobe wall and slowly slid down to the ground. Xuanzi came over and handed me a waterskin. "Drink some water. Why are you like you've lost your soul today? You can't even handle a spear. Didn't you practice quite well a few days ago?" I took the waterskin and took a big gulp. The water was warm, carrying a muddy smell and the peculiar stench of the waterskin. I wiped my mouth and decided to probe. "Brother Xuanzi, which section of the Great Wall are we guarding?" Xuanzi looked at me strangely. "BD Commandery, the Shang Commandery section." "Have you really lost your mind, you brat?" "BD Commandery, Shang Commandery. Qin Dynasty." My heart skipped a beat. "Then, what year is it now?" I asked again. "The 33rd year of the first emperor." Xuanzi's gaze at me became even stranger. "Xiaofan, don't scare me. Did you really run into something evil? Should we go find a witch doctor to take a look?" The 33rd year of the first emperor. The first emperor of Qin was still alive, and the Qin dynasty hadn't collapsed yet. I had transmigrated to the Qin dynasty and become a border garrison soldier. This luck is truly something else. I'm fine, just a bit dazed. I forced a smile. "I didn't sleep well last night." "That's true, anyone would have trouble sleeping after seeing that thing." Xuanzi lowered his voice. "But let me tell you, don't go around shouting about it. Scarface hates people talking about supernatural things. The ghost fire at the beacon tower last night was probably just phosphorus fire. The old soldiers say it's common in the wilderness. Ghost fire, phosphorus fire. I was just about to ask more when Scarface's roar exploded again. Rest is over. Get up, practice with the crossbows. For the next hour, I experienced what it meant to wish for death. The Chin crossbow, I know this thing. It was the sharp weapon with which the Chin army swept across the 6 states in history, with long range and great power. But what I didn't know was that drawing the string was so strenuous. The crossbow arm was made of hardwood and ox tendon, and it required all my strength to pull it open. I used all my might just to barely hook the string onto the trigger mechanism. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the crossbow body. Aim. The target 50 paces ahead. Scarface roared. I squinted my eyes and looked through the crude sight aiming device at the grass target in the distance. My hand shook, and the crossbow bolt flew off crookedly, sticking into the dirt pile next to the target. Missed the target. Scarface's voice was cold. Chin Xiaofan, you have no lunch today. The surrounding garrison soldiers let out low, mocking laughter. Xuanzi gave me a sympathetic look and whispered, I'll share half a bun with you tonight. I smiled bitterly. Is this my new life? A garrison soldier who can't even draw a crossbow, on the border of the Qin dynasty, guarding a wall of rammed earth, eating hard dry rations, taking abuse from a superior, and being looked at with strange eyes by comrades because of running into something evil. Drills continued until noon. The sun rose to the top of the sky, and waves of heat rolled in. Everyone looked like they had been fished out of the water. Scarface finally announced dismissal, and the garrison soldiers, as if granted amnesty, rushed toward the earthen stove next to the barracks. Lunch was millet porridge and dark, hard dry rations that were like stones. Because I missed the target, I really didn't get any porridge, only Xuanzi secretly handed me half a piece of dry ration. I squatted in the corner, and with some cold water, I gnawed little by little at that thing that could chip my teeth. It tasted like chewing wax. No, it was even worse than chewing wax. Wax at least wasn't this hard, and didn't have this musty smell. In the afternoon, I was assigned to repair a section of the earthen wall that had been washed away by rain. New blisters quickly formed on my hands, and old scars mixed with new mud, so dirty that my original skin color couldn't be seen. Working until the sun slanted west, we finally finished. My whole body ached as if it had fallen apart. I dragged my feet back to the adobe hut and collapsed directly onto the floor mat covered with hay. Xuanzi and the other 2 garrison soldiers in the same room also returned one after another, and the room was filled with an indescribable smell. Xiaofan, you're really not yourself today. A burly man named Big Ox said while taking off his clothes. Although you were thin and weak in the past, at least you could hit the target with your crossbow. Why are you like a woman today? Perhaps he was scared out of his wits last night. Another old soldier named Old Bangzi chuckled. Kid, what did you see while guarding the beacon tower? Tell us about it. I lay on the hay, looking at the cracks in the adobe ceiling. Say what? Say that I am not the Qin Xiaofan you know at all. Say that I come from a world you cannot understand. It was just, I saw a light in the distance, flickering. I said vaguely, I thought it was ghost fire. Light, Old Bangzi frowned. What color was the light? Yellow, a bit greenish. Old Bangzi's expression suddenly turned serious. He sat up and stared at me. In which direction? Northwest, outside the Great Wall. The room went quiet. Even Big Ox stopped talking. Xuanzi swallowed his saliva. Old Bangzi, are you saying? It's hard to say. Old Bangzi shook his head. But in the northwest direction, 100 miles outside the Great Wall, is the pasture where the Zongnu people are active. At this time of year, they should be migrating south. But when the Zongnu people light fires, it's mostly red light. Big Ox said. What if it's not the Zongnu people? Old Bangzi lowered his voice. West of Beatty, I've heard there are other barbarians. They don't look like us. Their eyes are blue, and their hair is yellow. Nonsense. Big Ox didn't believe it. Where would there be such people? I've heard passing merchant caravans talk about it. Old Bangzi insisted. They say in the far west there are white-skinned barbarians who fight in phalanxes, holding long spears, like moving walls. Phalanxes, long spears. My heart stirred. But before I could think about it carefully, the sound of a horn came from outside. Low, long, and carrying an ominous sense of urgency. Assembly horn. Xuanzi jumped up. Quick, there's a situation. Everyone scrambled to put on their clothes, grabbed their weapons, and rushed out the door. Scarface stood in the center of the training field, his face livid. Beacon tower signal, he roared. In the northwest direction, 50 miles away, unidentified troops have been discovered. The number is unknown, the movement is unknown. Everyone on alert, double guard duty tonight. The crowd became agitated. Are the Zhongnu people here again? Didn't we just beat back a wave? How many people are there this time? Scarface didn't answer. He just glared viciously at the whole group, and finally his gaze landed on me. Qin Xiaofan. My heart tightened. You, and Xuanzi, Big Ox, you three. Scarface pointed at us. Guard the northeast watchtower tonight. Keep your eyes peeled for me. If there is any movement, blow the horn to warn immediately. Yes, the three of us answered, bracing ourselves. Night fell quickly. The night at the border was bone-chillingly cold. I wrapped my clothes tight, but I still couldn't help shivering. The northeast watchtower was the highest earthen platform in the camp, from which you could see a large expanse of wilderness outside the Great Wall. The three of us took turns on guard, 1 hour each. The first shift was me. I climbed onto the earthen platform, hugged my spear, and curled up in the corner. Before my eyes was boundless darkness. The wind howled like countless ghosts crying. In the distance, a few wolf howls occasionally drifted over, shrill and long. I hugged the icy spear shaft, my teeth chattering. This wasn't a dream. I was really here. Qin Dynasty. Border. Garrison soldier. A nameless pawn who might die at any moment under the blades of the Zhongnu people, or some other barbarian. My name is Qin Xiaofan. An ordinary person who should have been moving bricks at a construction site in the 21st century and worrying about a mortgage. Now, I was standing under the night sky 2,000 years ago, guarding a section of earthen wall, clutching a rusty spear in my hand, not knowing if I would die tomorrow. What in the world is this all about? I endured the longest 2 hours of my life in the bone-chilling wind. When I handed over the watch to Big Ox, my legs were so frozen they were almost numb, and I nearly missed a step while descending the wooden ladder of the watchtower. Returning to that mud hut, which reeked of sweat and mildew, I found Xuanzi curled up on his straw mat, fast asleep and snoring like thunder. I fumbled my way into my own bunk in the dark, the coarse, dry straw dug into my back, and the cold linen cloth wrapped around my body. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the pitch-black ceiling, my mind a complete blank. This was the life of a garrison soldier. No cell phones, no Wi-Fi, no hot showers, no mattresses. Only endless cold, exhaustion, hunger, and the fear of losing my life at any moment. I don't know how I fell asleep, but it felt like I had just closed my eyes when a thunderous roar came from outside. The Mao hour has arrived. All hands assemble. I snapped my eyes open. The sky was just beginning to turn gray. Scarface's roar echoed through the camp. Anyone who isn't on the parade ground within 10 breaths gets 20 lashes with the military cane. The mud hut instantly erupted into chaos. Xuanzi sprang up like a coiled spring, Big Ox grumbled as he pulled on his clothes, and old Bangzi was the fastest, having already tied his belt. I scrambled to wrap myself in that dirty, stiff linen robe and rushed out with the crowd. When I reached the parade ground, Scarface was staring grimly at an hourglass. The fine sand had already run to the bottom. Too slow, he said coldly. Everyone, breakfast is have. Low groans rose from the crowd, but no one dared to argue. Morning training began. Today's practice was on drill formations. Scarface demanded everyone stand in 4 rows, aligned front to back and left to right, without moving or making a sound, just standing there like that. It sounded simple. It was lethal to execute. The sun gradually rose higher, and heat radiated from the ground. Sweat streamed down my cheeks, running into my eyes and stinging painfully. I wanted to raise my hand to wipe it away, but as soon as I moved a finger, I heard Scarface's roar. 4th person in the 3rd row. What are you moving for? Add another quarter of an hour. I gritted my teeth, staring fixedly at the back of Xuanzi's head in front of me. My legs began to go numb, a numbness creeping from the soles of my feet up to my thighs. My lower back ached as if it were about to snap. My sweat-soaked clothes stuck to my body, sticky and itchy. Flies buzzed around, occasionally landing on my face, and I could only use my eyelids to shoo them away. Time passed as slowly as a snail crawling. My mind began to wander. At this time, I should have just squeezed onto the subway, wearing headphones and scrolling through my phone, complaining about the morning rush hour. The construction site should also be starting work now, and Foreman Wong was probably yelling at some worker for slacking off. Stand straight. Scarface's roar pulled me back to reality. I hurriedly straightened my back. After who knows how much longer, Scarface finally spoke. All right, rest in place for a quarter of an hour. No sitting, no lying down. You can move, but you are not allowed to leave the formation. Everyone felt as if they had been granted a reprieve and began to move their stiff limbs. Xuanzi turned around, grimacing, and said, "My legs are completely numb." "Me too," I whispered, taking the opportunity to wipe the sweat from my face. "This is still considered good," old Bangzi, who was in the front row, said without looking back. "When a real battle starts, sometimes you have to lie in ambush for a whole day and night without moving. You even have to hold it if you wet your pants." I shuddered. The quarter of an hour passed quickly, and Scarface ordered, "Now, practice marching. Listen to the drumbeat. When the drum sounds once, move your left foot. Twice, you're right. Anyone who gets a step wrong doesn't get lunch." A tattered leather drum was brought out. Scarface took the mallet himself. Boom. I hurriedly stepped out with my left foot. Most people were like me, their movements chaotic. Only a few veterans had steady, measured steps. Boom. Stepped with my right foot. This time was better, but the formation was still crooked. "Stop." Scarface put down the drumstick and walked to the front of the formation. "You call this marching? This is fleeing for your lives. Look at you, like a flock of sheep. Let me tell you, on the battlefield, a disorganized formation means death. The enemy's arrows will slip through the gaps, and their spears will pierce through a chaotic formation. If you don't want to die, then practice." He picked up the drumstick again. Boom, boom, boom. We marched to the drumbeat like marionettes. Left foot, right foot, left foot. Sweat dripped into my eyes, but I couldn't stop to wipe it. My legs felt like they were filled with lead, each step incredibly heavy. After practicing for 2 hours, we could finally eat breakfast. The so-called breakfast was a bowl of millet porridge so thin you could see your reflection in it, and half a piece of dark, brick-hard dry ration. I held the broken pottery bowl, squatted in the corner, and drank the porridge in small sips. The porridge was lukewarm, or rather, just not icy. The millet wasn't cooked through, and it felt like sand in my mouth. The dry ration was too hard. I broke off a small piece and soaked it in the porridge, and it took forever before I could barely bite into it. Xuanzi leaned over and poured half the porridge from his bowl into mine. "You should eat more, you worked hard on guard duty last night." I paused, stunned. "Then you." "I'm sturdy, I can handle hunger," he grinned, revealing 2 rows of yellow teeth. "Besides, you missed lunch yesterday. If you don't get enough to eat at breakfast today, you really won't be able to hold out." My heart warmed. In this strange era, in this strange place, there was at least this little bit of kindness. "Thanks." I didn't refuse and took it to drink. The porridge still tasted the same, but it didn't seem so hard to swallow anymore. After the meal was a short break. The garrison soldiers gathered in 2s and 3s, some were repairing weapons, some were mending clothes, and some were simply lying on the ground soaking up the sun, even though the sun was already scorching enough to peel a person's skin. I sat in the shade under the eaves, rubbing my aching legs. Xuanzi sat nearby, holding a whetstone, carefully sharpening the edge of his bronze short sword. "Xiaofan, what did you do at home before?" Xuanzi suddenly asked. I paused. My family did some odd jobs." This was the information I had pieced together from Xuanzi's previous chattering. The original owner of this body, Qin Xiaofan, was a commoner from Yueyang, Guanzhong, and his family seemed to be carpenters or masons. Before being conscripted for border defense, he had been working odd jobs in the city. "No wonder your build is so thin," Xuanzi nodded. "Not like me. My family are farmers. I've done farm work since I was a kid, so I have a lot of strength." "Brother Xuanzi, is your family doing all right?" I asked. Xuanzi's sword sharpening motion paused, his eyes dimming. "I don't know. I've been conscripted for 2 years and haven't received a single letter from home. I still have my old mother and younger brother back home. My brother is still young, I don't know if he can manage the fields." He didn't continue, just sharpened the sword even harder. My heart sank. This was the norm for garrison soldiers, far from home, with no known date of return, life and death uncertain. It will be all right, I said dryly. When your term is up and you return home, you'll be able to see them. Term is up, old Bangsy, who was nearby, sneered. Kid, do you think border defense is something you can return from in 3 or 5 years? I've been in this hellhole for 8 years. Of the 100 people who came here at the same time, fewer than 30 are still alive. He paused, his murky eyes looking toward the Great Wall in the distance. Border defense is a road of no return. You either die here or grow old here. Returning home, just dream about it. There was silence in front of the mud hut. Only the rustling sound of the whetstone rubbing against the blade and the wailing sound of the wind blowing over the mud wall in the distance. The afternoon's work was repairing the Great Wall. We had to dig up the yellow earth from a distance, carry it in baskets to the foot of the Great Wall, add water and grass stalks, and then tamp it down layer by layer with wooden rammers. Scarface divided us into 3 groups, 1 group to dig, 1 to carry, and 1 to tamp. I was assigned to the carrying group. The baskets were woven from coarse vines with rough edges that dug into my shoulders, causing sharp pain. A basket full of wet earth weighed at least 100 caddies. It was fine to carry for a few steps, but the distance from the digging site to the foot of the Great Wall was over 300 steps. After 1 round trip, my shoulders were rubbed raw. On the second trip, blood seeped out, staining the linen robe red. On the third trip, my shoulders burned with pain, and every step felt like a knife cutting into my flesh. Hurry up, what are you dawdling for? The supervising military officer brandished a leather whip. This section of the wall must be finished today. Anyone who doesn't finish before sunset doesn't get dinner. I gritted my teeth, kept my head down, and inched forward step by step. Sweat mixed with blood, sticking stickily to my back. My vision went black in waves, and my lungs wheezed like a broken bellows. Xiaofan, are you all right? Xuanzi caught up from behind. The basket on his back was fuller than mine, but his steps were still steady. I'm all right, I panted heavily. Put a cloth on your shoulder. He took a piece of tattered linen from his bosom. Put it under the basket ropes, it'll be a bit better. I took the cloth and placed it on my shoulder. It was indeed a bit better, but the pain remained sharp. Back and forth, I didn't know how many trips I had made. The sun slowly slanted westward from directly overhead, and the shadows grew longer and longer. My shoulders went from intense pain to numbness, and my legs felt like 2 wooden stakes, just mechanically moving forward. My mind was a blank, with only one thought. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, there would be no food. Finally, as the sun was about to touch the horizon, Scarface shouted, "Work is done." I felt an immense sense of relief, threw down the basket, and collapsed onto the ground. My whole body ached as if it were falling apart, and every muscle was wailing. Several blisters had formed on my hands, some of which had already broken, oozing yellow fluid. My shoulders were even more horrific. The linen robe was soaked through with a large patch of blood, sticking to my skin. Dinner was similar to breakfast, thin porridge and dry rations. But there were a few slices of pickled vegetables, dark, salty to the point of bitterness, but at least they had some flavor. I wolfed it down, even licking the bottom of the bowl clean. After the meal, there was a short period of free time. The garrison soldiers gathered on the open ground in front of the barracks. Some continued to repair weapons, some chatted, and some simply lay on the ground looking at the stars. I sat leaning against the mud wall, watching the sky darken bit by bit, the stars lighting up one by one. The starry sky was clear and breathtaking. The Milky Way spanned the sky like a glowing ribbon, and the dense points of stars made one dizzy. Xiaofan, are you literate? Xuanzi suddenly asked. I paused. I recognize some. I'm so envious, Xuanzi sighed. I'm illiterate. There aren't many literate people among us garrison soldiers, only old Bangsy knows some, and Corporal Wong in the next room. What is literacy useful for? I asked. At least you can write letters home, Xuanzi said. If you're illiterate, it's hard to even send a message home. You have to beg someone to write it, and you have to give them a favor. I haven't sent a letter home in 2 years, I don't know how my old mother is doing. His voice lowered. I looked at his tanned profile, and a complex emotion welled up in my heart. This 18 or 19-year-old youth should have been at home farming, marrying, having children, and living an ordinary but stable life. Yet here he was, carrying a 100-caddy basket of earth, shoulders rubbed raw, bleeding and sweating, not knowing if he would die tomorrow. When my shoulders get better, all right for you, I said. Xuanzi's eyes lit up. Really? Yeah, I nodded. But my handwriting isn't very good either. It's fine, as long as you can write. Xuanzi became happy. Then I'll save up some things over the next 2 days, and when the time comes, I'll entrust it to a passing merchant caravan to take back. Merchant caravan. Yeah, at the beginning of every month, a merchant caravan comes from Bidi Commandery, heading west. They pass by our camp and trade salt, cloth, needles, and thread for the furs we hunt and the medicinal herbs we dig. Xuanzi explained. We can entrust them to take the letter then, just give them some favor. I nodded. This was probably the only contact the garrison soldiers had with the outside world. Night fell completely, and a few bonfires were lit in the camp. The firelight flickered, reflecting on tired, numb faces. Someone began to sing, a folk song from the Guangzhong area, the tune desolate, the lyrics blurry. Gradually, more people hummed along. The singing drifted in the night wind, mixed with the crackling sound of firewood, carrying into the distance. I listened to the song, watching the bonfire, the wounds on my shoulders throbbing. This was the daily routine at the frontier. Day after day of training, labor, hunger, and pain. Limited rest, limited communication, limited hope. No entertainment, no comfort, no future. Only the instinct to survive, and a glimmer of light between comrades. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath of the air, which carried the smell of smoke and earth. Qin Shaofan, you have to adapt. You have to survive. No matter how bitter, how tiring, how difficult. Because only by surviving is it possible to find the way back, or, at least, to find the meaning of living in this era. The Great Wall in the distance stood silently in the night, like a huge scar stretching across the land. And we lived at the foot of this scar, using our flesh and blood to guard this mud wall, guarding the home behind the wall that we might never be able to return to. The wound on my shoulder hadn't scabbed over yet, and a new round of torture began. Scarface called this enhanced training, but I suspected he just didn't like the look of us. Morning exercises had been upgraded from standing in formation to standing in formation with added weight, 20 pounds of sandbags on each of our backs, standing for 2 hours under the scorching sun. Sweat trickled down our spines like little streams, soaking through the hemp cloth and seeping into our wounds. It felt like someone was rubbing salt into the flesh. I gritted my teeth and held on, repeatedly reciting the multiplication table in my head to distract myself. Don't ask me why it was the multiplication table. It was probably the only pillar of sanity left that proved I came from the 21st century. Just as I reached 7 nines or 63, a short, sharp horn blast came from the beacon tower on the Great Wall in the distance. Woo! The sound wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. Scarface jerked his head up, the scar on his face twitching. All the garrison soldiers on the training ground stopped what they were doing and looked in unison toward the northwest. The horn sounded only once, and then there was nothing more. What are you all gawking at? Scarface roared back. Keep training. But the atmosphere had clearly changed. Those who had been whispering complaints just moments ago clamped their mouths shut, and everyone tensed their bodies. During the subsequent training, Scarface stopped yelling at anyone. His eyes darted toward the beacon tower from time to time, his brows knitted into a knot. After lunch, various rumors began circulating in the camp. They saw a herd of wild sheep over by the beacon tower, Big Ox said while sharpening his spearhead. Every year around this time, the wild sheep migrate south, passing through the gaps in the Great Wall. Would they blow a horn for a herd of wild sheep? Old Bangzi squatted in the corner, slowly rolling tobacco leaves. The rules of the beacon tower are that 3 blasts constitute a warning. 1 blast is an alert. What kind of alert? Xuanzi leaned over to ask. Old Bangzi lit the leaves and took a puff, choking until he coughed. Cough, cough. It just means they saw something, but they aren't sure if it's friend or foe, so they're reminding each beacon tower to keep a lookout. Then what did they actually see? I couldn't help but ask. Old Bangzi glanced at me with his clouded eyes. Kid, don't ask about things you shouldn't. But while repairing the Great Wall in the afternoon, I noticed some abnormalities. Usually, the military officers supervising the work were strict but would still find a shady spot to hide from the sun. Today was different. All 3 officers were patrolling back and forth on the wall, their eyes fixed intently on the northwestern horizon. Scarface had gone straight up to the beacon tower and hadn't come down for a long time. Something's not right, Xuanzi whispered in my ear during a break from carrying dirt. I've been here for 2 years, and I've never seen Scarface stay up on the beacon tower for more than a quarter of an hour. What do you think it is? I asked, panting. Xuanzi shook his head. I don't know. But it's definitely not good. At sunset, we dragged our exhausted bodies back to the camp. Dinner included half a bowl more porridge than usual, but no one was happy. An oppressive silence permeated the camp. Even Big Ox, who usually loved to joke, ate with his head down, not saying a word. After nightfall, Scarface summoned everyone to the training ground. Torches crackled, illuminating his face crisscrossed with scars. From tonight on, night guard duty will be doubled, he said in a low voice, lacking his usual roar, which made it all the more unsettling. 2 people per post, rotating every 2 hours. The watchtower, the beacon tower, the camp gate, all positions will have double guards. If you spot anything unusual, blow the horn immediately, no need to ask for permission. A commotion rippled through the crowd. Centurion, an old soldier, spoke up, are the Zongnu people coming? Scarface was silent for a few seconds. I'm not sure. But all the beacon towers to the northwest have reported abnormalities today. Some have seen dust and smoke in the distance, some have heard strange noises, and others. He paused. Others have seen unidentified lights at night. My heart tightened suddenly. Lights at night, was it the same thing I saw at the beacon tower that night? Whatever it is, Scarface raised his voice, our duty is to hold this stretch of the Great Wall. From tonight on, everyone keep your weapons on you, sleep with them in your arms. Do you understand? Understood. The group replied in unison, but their voices were laced with tension. Xuanzi and I were assigned to the first shift at the camp gate. From midnight to 2 a.m., it was the deepest and coldest part of the night. The camp gate was actually just a row of wooden fences with an opening in the middle, blocked by thick wooden bars during the day and an added chain at night. The sentry post stood on an earthen platform behind the fence, from which one could see the desolate slopes outside. Xuanzi wrapped his leather coat tighter and whispered, Xiao Fan, do you think the Zongnu people are really coming with a large army? I don't know, I told the truth. But Scarface said he's not sure, so it probably isn't the usual Zongnu cavalry. If the Zongnu people were coming, there would be a lot of dust and smoke, and a lot of commotion, the beacon towers would have seen them long ago. Then what could it be? Xuanzi's voice trembled slightly. It couldn't really be ghosts, could it? Just as I was about to speak, my ears suddenly caught a strange sound. The sound was very faint, coming from the northwest, drifting into my ears on the night wind. It sounded like many people talking simultaneously from very far away, or perhaps like the earth itself was groaning. Did you hear that? I lowered my voice. Xuanzi listened intently for a while, and his face changed. I heard it. What is that sound? We held our breath and listened carefully. The sound was intermittent, sometimes clearer, sometimes fading away. But one thing was certain, it wasn't a natural sound. It had rhythm, it had regularity, like some kind of marching sound. Should we blow the horn? Xuanzi grabbed the horn. Wait a little longer, I pressed his hand down. Scarface said to blow it only if we spot something unusual. Let's first determine what this is. We lay on the earthen platform, our eyes fixed on the direction the sound was coming from. The night was heavy, and we couldn't see anything in the distance, just pitch darkness. But the sound was getting clearer. Now I could tell it wasn't a single sound, but a mixture of many, the clanking of metal, heavy footsteps, and also, commands. Someone is marching, I blurted out. This late, Xuanzi's voice was dry. The Zongnu people never march at night, they need to rest their horses at night. What if it's not the Zongnu people? I remembered old Bangzi's words from the day. He said there are white-skinned barbarians in the far west. Before I could finish, the sound suddenly changed. A sharp sound of metal clashing came, crisp and jarring, like many spears striking the ground at once. Immediately after, there was a short, sharp horn blast, not the ox horn of the Qin army, but a shriller, clearer sound, like a brass instrument. What kind of horn is that? Xuanzi was so startled he almost jumped up. I was bewildered too. I had heard the Qin army's horn, it was low and deep. This sound was completely different, with strong penetrating power, traveling very far in the night sky. Even more eerie was that after the horn blast, several lights suddenly appeared in the distance. They weren't beacon fires, nor campfires, but small clusters of moving lights, arranged with extreme precision, slowly moving forward in the darkness. Someone is marching with torches at night, I muttered. How many people? Xuanzi counted the lights. 1, 2, 3, at least a dozen lights, and the distance between each is about the same. This formation is too orderly. It was indeed orderly. The speed at which the lights moved was consistent, and the spacing was consistent, as if measured with a ruler. This was absolutely not the style of a nomadic people. When the Xiongnu people carry torches, they are either scattered all over the place or in a long line. They wouldn't line up in such an orderly array. The sound gradually faded away. The lights also slowly disappeared into the northwestern night. Everything returned to silence, with only the wind moaning. But Xuanzi and I were still lying on the earthen platform, covered in cold sweat. "We have to report this," I said, my voice hoarse. Xuanzi nodded, took a deep breath, and blew the horn. Woo, woo, 2 long blasts, representing the discovery of suspicious movement. Soon, more torches lit up in the camp. Scarface rushed over with a few old soldiers, wearing only leather armor. "What's the situation?" Scarface asked sharply. Xuanzi and I told them everything we had heard and seen in detail. The more Scarface heard, the gloomier his face became, and the old soldiers beside him exchanged looks, their expressions grave. "Are you sure it's not the Xiongnu people?" an old soldier asked. "The Xiongnu people wouldn't march like that," another old soldier shook his head. "They would either set up camp at night or launch a sneak attack. They wouldn't walk in formation while holding torches." "And that horn sound?" Scarface narrowed his eyes. "I've never heard a sound like that." "Centurion," I hesitated before speaking, "I heard that there are white-skinned barbarians in the far west who fight in phalanxes and use long spears." Everyone looked at me. "Where did you hear that?" Scarface stared at me. "Old Bangzi said it," I confessed honestly. "He said he heard it mentioned by passing merchant caravans." Scarface turned to look at Old Bangzi in the crowd. Old Bangzi slowly walked out and nodded. "I did say that. But that was a rumor from over a dozen years ago, saying that there was a powerful nation 10,000 miles to the west, whose soldiers wore iron armor, carried long spears, and fought in wall-like formations." 10,000 miles away, Scarface sneered. What would people from 10,000 miles away be doing at the foot of the Great Wall? No one could answer. After a moment of silence, Scarface ordered, "All guards be extra vigilant tonight. After daybreak, I'll send people to check on the beacon tower. Everyone go back. Those who need to change shifts, change shifts. Those who need to sleep, sleep." The crowd dispersed. Xuanzi and I handed over the shift to the next two, and dragged our heavy feet back to the earthen hut. In the room, Big Ox and Old Bangzi were still awake, waiting by the oil lamp. "Did you really hear it?" Big Ox asked eagerly. Xuanzi recounted the situation again. Big Ox was stunned, while Old Bangzi remained silent, puffing away at his choking tobacco leaves. "Old Bangzi," I finally couldn't help but ask, "what do you think that was?" Old Bangzi exhaled smoke and spoke slowly. 30 years ago, when I was still a new recruit, I followed a caravan heading west. I went as far as a place called Yuaji. The elders there said that further west, over countless mountains and across vast deserts, there was a powerful nation called Persia. The Persians said that to their west there was an even more powerful nation, called, what was it called? He frowned and thought for a moment. It seemed to be called Macedonia. They said that nation produced a god of war who led his army on eastern expeditions, conquering countless nations, marching for 3 years, losing half his men, before finally crossing the great snowy mountains to the west. Macedonia. My heart skipped a beat. Alexander the Great's Macedonian Empire. Then what? Xuanzi pressed. Then there was no more. Old Bangzi shook his head. It's all hearsay. Who knows if it's true or false? The caravan turned back when it reached Yuaji. No one had really been that far. But what if? I swallowed my saliva. What if that Macedonian army really has attacked? The earthen hut fell into a deathly silence. The flame of the oil lamp flickered, casting distorted shadows on the earthen walls. Impossible. Big Ox was the first to break the silence. 10,000 miles away. How could they get here? Deserts, high mountains, snow-capped ranges. They couldn't even walk that far, let alone bring an army. Then how do you explain what we heard and saw tonight? Xuanzi countered. Big Ox couldn't answer. Old Bangzi extinguished his tobacco leaves and lay back down on the straw mat. Sleep. If it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, you can't avoid it. We'll know tomorrow. Although he said that, none of us slept soundly that night. I lay awake for half the night, the weird horn sound echoing in my head over and over, along with the orderly moving lights in the darkness. If it really was a Macedonian phalanx. If Alexander the Great really hadn't taken the wrong path, but had continued to march east, crossed the Pamir Mountains, traversed the western regions, and fought all the way to the foot of the Great Wall. Then what was written in the history books? What about me, a time traveler? The wind outside the window was still howling, and the occasional howl of a wolf came from afar. But tonight, the wind seemed to be mixed with something else, the lingering echo of metal, the sound of footsteps from afar, and the oppressive feeling of a huge shadow slowly approaching. The strange sounds in the wind had already reached the foot of the Great Wall. And none of us knew what was hidden in the wind. Before dawn had even broken, Scarface kicked us awake. You, and you, his thick finger pointed across the crowd like a judge's brush, Qin Shaofan, Xuanzi, Old Bangzi. Bring 3 days of dry rations and water, and report to the camp gate at the first quarter of the Mao hour. I wasn't fully awake yet, and I asked dazedly, go where? Scarface's face looked exceptionally ferocious under the oil lamp's light. Go find out exactly what kind of ghost thing was loitering right under our noses last night. The camp was deathly silent. All the garrison soldiers looked at the three of us with complicated expressions, as if they were looking at 3 sheep about to be slaughtered. Xuanzi's face went pale, his lips trembled twice, but he couldn't get a word out. Old Bangzi, on the other hand, was calm and slowly began to pack his bag. Centurion, I said, bracing myself, I have never done reconnaissance before. This was the truth. The original owner, Qin Shaofan, was just an ordinary garrison soldier. He was fine with guarding the city or repairing walls, but going out for reconnaissance. He probably couldn't even tell north from south. That's why I'm sending you, Scarface said coldly. You have sharp eyes, you were the first to notice the abnormality last night. Besides, he walked up to me, his eagle-like eyes staring at me. You've been acting strange lately, talking about seeing ghost fires one moment, and hearing about some white-skinned barbarians the next. Since you know so much, go see for yourself, and report back once you've seen clearly. My heart sank. Was he using me as a human radar? But there are no buts. Scarface cut me off. This is a military order. Those who disobey will be beheaded. He said that last word, beheaded, lightly, but my back was instantly soaked in cold sweat. At the first quarter of the Mao hour, the sky was just beginning to brighten. The 3 of us gathered at the camp gate. Besides our packs, each of us was issued a short bow and a quiver of arrows. Old Bangzi brought an extra small bronze mirror, saying it was an old trick of the beacon soldiers, it'll be useful. Scarface personally saw us out of the camp. The fence gate was pulled open just a crack, and we squeezed out into a wilderness so desolate it chilled the heart. Listen, Scarface lowered his voice. Your mission is not to fight, but to see clearly. See clearly how many people there are, how they are dressed, what weapons they use, and which direction they are heading. Once you see clearly, come back. Do not engage, and do not get exposed. Do you understand? Understood. We 3 replied in low voices. Before sunset, whether you have seen clearly or not, you must head back. By noon tomorrow at the latest, I want to see you return. Scarface paused. If I don't see you by noon tomorrow, I will assume you are dead. The fence gate slowly closed behind us. We stood on the slope outside the Great Wall, the morning wind scraping against our cheeks like a knife. In the distance, the horizon was tinged with a fish belly white, but that light looked devoid of warmth. Let's go. Old Bangzi tightened the collar of his fur coat and led the way toward the northwest. Xuanzi followed, and I took a deep breath before stepping forward as well. This was my first time truly stepping outside the Great Wall. Underfoot was the loose, rocky Gobi Desert. Withered yellow grass stems trembled in the wind, and occasionally we could see animal remains, bleached white by the wind and sand. The air was drier than in the camp, and breathing it into my lungs felt like sand rubbing against them. We kept silent, moving along a barely visible trail. Old Bangzi walked in the lead, his footsteps very light. Xuanzi walked in the middle, nervously glancing back from time to time. I brought up the rear, gripping my bow tightly, even though I didn't know how to use the thing at all. After walking for an hour, the sun rose. The Gobi Desert revealed its ferocious face under the sunlight. The visibility was excellent, allowing us to see very far, but that also meant, if there were people in the distance, they could easily see us too. Rest for a while. Old Bangzi stopped behind a weathered boulder. Drink some water, but don't drink too much. We hid in the shade of the rock and took turns drinking water. The water in the waterskin had a leathery taste, but in a place like this, it was a lifesaver. Old Bangzi, How are we going to find them? Xuanzi asked in a low voice. Such a big place. Look for traces. Old Bangzi grabbed a handful of sand and rubbed it in his hand. A large group of people passed by last night, they must have left traces. Footprints, wheel tracks, horse dung, and... He looked up at the sky, and scent. Scent? I asked, confused. When there are many people, the places they walk through have a different scent. Old Bangzi didn't explain further. Follow me later, don't wander around, and don't touch anything. After resting for a quarter of an hour, we continued forward. Old Bangzi walked even slower, his eyes fixed on the ground, crouching down from time to time to brush aside the sand with his fingers. After walking for another hour, he suddenly stopped. Found it. Xuanzi and I leaned in. On the ground, amidst the gravel and sand, were shallow but exceptionally clear imprints. There were many, many footprints, arranged too neatly. This is... Xuanzi crouched down and gestured with his hand. These footprints are bigger than our boots. Indeed, the boots of the Qin army were made to fit snugly for agility. These footprints, however, were much wider and very deep, indicating that the wearers were heavy or carrying heavy loads. Not just that, Old Bangzi pointed at the arrangement of the footprints. Look, aligned front to back, row by row. They aren't walking loosely, this is marching in formation. My heart began to race. Marching in formation, lighting fires at night, orderly bugle calls. All the clues were pointing toward an answer I dared not think about. Keep going forward. Old Bangzi stood up, his expression more grave than before. We followed the direction of the footprints, proceeding cautiously. The further we went, the more traces we found. Besides footprints, other things began to appear. A broken, dark red pottery shard, several snapped leather straps with exotic patterns, and, most unsettlingly, a few round, dark brown pieces of horse dung, as well as scattered camel skeletons and damaged Persia-style waterskins. Sheep dung, Xuanzi asked. Horse dung. Old Bangzi picked up a piece, crushed it, and sniffed. But something's not right. The fodder these horses eat is different from the horses in our central plains, it's mixed with western regions' hay and the scent of spices. He handed the crumbs to me. I leaned in and sniffed, a pungent smell mixed with some kind of spice. It was definitely not the smell horse dung should have according to my knowledge. Keep moving. Old Bangzi threw away the dung and placed his hand on the hilt of his sword. At noon, we climbed a low mound. Old Bangzi signaled us to lie down, then took out the small bronze mirror from his bosom. He adjusted the angle, letting the sunlight reflect off it, and flashed it toward the distance. What are you doing? I asked in a low voice. Checking for sentries. Old Bangzi didn't look back. If there is a reflection back, it means someone over there is also using a bronze mirror to shine at us. There was no reflection. We lay on top of the mound, using the withered grass as cover, and looked toward the northwest. Then, I saw it. About 7 or 8 li away, on a relatively flat part of the Gobi Desert, there was a patch of things. Because the distance was too great, I couldn't see the details, only a dense patch of gray-brown protrusions, like a large field of mushrooms that had suddenly grown from the ground. Those protrusions were arranged extremely neatly, in straight rows and columns, like squares drawn with a ruler. And around those mushrooms, there were some smaller, moving black dots. Like ants, but much larger than ants, moving slowly against the gray-brown background. That is, Xuanzi's voice was trembling. A camp. Old Bangzi gritted his teeth. That's a huge camp. My eyes were fixed intently on the scene. The distance was too great, and I couldn't see what those mushrooms were. Were they tents? But what kind of tents would be arranged so neatly? I also couldn't see what kind of people those moving black dots were, but one thing was certain, that was definitely not a Xiongnu people camp. The Xiongnu people lived in felt tents, pitched in a scattered manner, with horses grazing everywhere. But that camp in the distance was so neat it made one's scalp tingle. How many people? I asked. Old Bangzi squinted for a long time, then said in a low voice, at least 5,000. Maybe more. 5,000 people. Our broken camp had, at most, less than 200 garrison soldiers. What are they doing? Xuanzi asked. Setting up camp, resting. Old Bangzi said, look at those moving black dots, it looks like they are moving things, or, setting up defenses. Setting up defenses. This word sent a chill through my whole body. If they were just an army passing through, they wouldn't set up camp and defenses so close to the Great Wall. Unless, they intended to stay here for a while. Or, They intended to attack. We can't go any further. Old Bangzy put away the bronze mirror. This distance is already the limit. Any closer, and we will definitely be discovered by sentries. Then Xuanzi looked at Old Bangzy. Did you see clearly? Old Bangzy turned to me. Qin Shaofan, your eyes are the best, tell me, what did you see? I swallowed, forcing myself to calm down and organize my words. First, the camp is extremely orderly, in straight rows and columns. It is definitely not the way nomadic people set up camp. Second, the scale of the camp is very large, conservatively estimated at over 5,000 people. Third, they are active, possibly moving supplies or setting up defenses. Fourth, I paused. Judging from the neatness of the camp, this troop's discipline is terrifyingly strict. Perhaps even stricter than our most elite Qin army units. Once I said this, I was shocked myself. Old Bangzy and Xuanzi looked at me in silence. Anything else? Old Bangzy asked. I tried hard to recall every detail I saw on the mound, also, the color of the camp. It's not the gray-white of Zhongnu felt tents, but a deeper gray-brown. Maybe leather tents, or some other material. Old Bangzy nodded and stood up. Enough. This intelligence is enough for Scarface to deal with. Let's head back. We started heading back along the path we came from. This time we walked much faster than when we came, almost at a jog. No one spoke. Everyone was tense, with ears pricked and eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. The Gobi Desert shone with a blinding white light under the afternoon sun. The wind grew stronger, whipping up sand and hitting our faces with stinging pain. But colder than the wind was the thought in my heart. What exactly was the background of that army? Where did they come from? Where were they going? Most importantly, what did they want to do by coming to the foot of the Great Wall? At sunset, we saw the earth-yellow outline of the Great Wall from afar. At that moment, I had never felt that battered, uneven earthen wall to be so dear, and so fragile. After Scarface finished listening to our report, his face looked as awful as if he had eaten moldy rations. 5,000 men, organized like a chessboard. He stared at the three of us, his eyes full of suspicion. Are you sure you didn't miss anything? The wind in the Gobi Desert is strong, and sometimes blowing sand looks like human figures. Centurion, Old Bangzy spoke up with a raspy voice, still panting from the hurried journey back. I have served as a garrison soldier for 30 years. I have seen the Zhongnu people, the Yuezhi, and all kinds of bandits and horse thieves at the foot of the Great Wall. But I have never seen a camp like that, 30 rows across and 50 columns deep. The spacing between each tent wouldn't vary by more than 3 steps if you measured it. There was a deathly silence in the barracks. The flickering flame of the oil lamp made the scar on Scarface's face look particularly hideous. And I licked my dry, cracked lips and added, the color and shape of those tents aren't right either. They aren't round, they're square. The color is dark brown, like thick leather soaked in oil. And footprints, Xuanzi said quietly. Their boot prints are a size larger than ours. Scarface was silent for a long time. He walked to the wall and tapped his fingers unconsciously against the rammed earth, producing a dull, thumping sound. The sound was exceptionally clear in the silent night, and every tap felt like it was drumming against our hearts. Finally, he turned around. Before dawn, he said, the 3 of you are going out again. Go again. Xuanzi nearly jumped up. Not to the camp this time. Scarface walked back to us and lowered his voice. Go to the east of the camp, to that slightly higher earthen slope. Old Bangzy, you know the place. Old Bangzy nodded, his expression also looking grim. I need to know, Scarface said, enunciating every word, what exactly they are doing. Are they passing through, or do they plan to stay? Are they resting, or are they preparing for something? Most importantly, he paused, I need to know who they really are. But Centurion, I couldn't help but speak up, if we get discovered. Then don't get discovered. Scarface cut me off, his gaze fierce. You are garrison soldiers, not 3-year-old children. Stealth, concealment, observation, these are the most basic skills. Old Bangzy will teach you. He looked at the pitch-black night outside the window. Go get an hour of sleep now. Leave at the hour of the ox. You must be in position before dawn and well hidden. I want you to see their every move clearly after daybreak. Sleep. I lay on the straw mat, eyes wide open, staring at the pitch-black ceiling. My mind was filled with that eerily organized camp and Scarface's words, I need to know who they really are. An hour later, we were woken up again. This time, the equipment we brought was even simpler. A water skin each, 2 pieces of dry rations, and a short blade. We didn't bring bows or arrows. In case we get discovered, they'll be a burden when running away, old Bangzy explained. We slipped out of the camp like 3 ghosts, diving into the thick night. This time, old Bangzy led the way, taking a more hidden path. We used our hands and feet, groping our way forward in the darkness. The wind was stronger than before, masking the sound of our footsteps. Old Bangzy walked in the lead, his figure almost completely blended into the darkness, and only when he occasionally turned his head did his eyes reflect a tiny bit of the faint skylight. After walking for about 2 hours, old Bangzy stopped and pointed ahead. It was an earthen slope slightly higher than the surrounding area. The top of the slope perfectly overlooked the camp we had seen earlier, and it was closer, only about 3 or 4 li away. Crawl up, old Bangzy said in a low voice. Move slowly, don't knock over any stones. Once you reach the top, hide behind the bushes. Don't move, don't make a sound. Before dawn, no one is allowed to show their head. We did as told. Like 3 lizards, we clung to the ground and crawled up bit by bit. Gravel dug painfully into our chests, and the sharp thorns of dry grass pricked our palms, but no one dared to stop. By the time we reached the top of the slope, a hint of gray-white had appeared on the horizon. We hid behind a relatively dense cluster of bushes, carefully pushed aside the dead branches, and looked toward the camp. The sky wasn't fully bright yet, and the camp was shrouded in a hazy gray-blue. But compared to our distant view earlier, the visibility was much clearer now. I could clearly see that those tents were indeed square, made of thick, dark brown leather, and secured to the ground with wooden stakes. The tents were arranged in perfectly straight horizontal and vertical rows, with wide paths left between each row. The camp was quiet, with only a few scattered sparks of fire flickering in the wind. Are they sleeping? Xuanzi asked in a whisper. Old Bangzy didn't answer. His eyes were fixed intently on a large open space in the center of the camp. The daylight brightened bit by bit. When the first ray of sunlight pierced the horizon and shone onto the Gobi Desert, the camp came alive. It wasn't a sudden clamor, but an orderly, gradual process of waking up. First, some people walked out of the tents and started fires in the open space. Then, more people followed, queuing up to go somewhere at the edge of the camp, I guess to fetch water or relieve themselves. The entire process was terrifyingly quiet. You could barely hear any talking, only the sound of footsteps and the clinking of metal gently colliding. Look at their clothes, old Bangzy said in a low voice. I squinted. The distance was still a bit far, but I could make out the outlines. Those people were wearing a strange kind of clothing, not the leather robes of the Xiongnu people, nor the linen garments of the Qin army. It was more like a tunic. The hem only reached their thighs, with cloth strips wrapped around their legs, and they wore those wide boots on their feet. Then, I saw some people putting on some kind of shiny object. Armor, Xuanzi gasped. Yes, armor, but not the leather lamellar armor commonly used by the Qin army, but something that reflected a dull metallic luster in the morning light, bronze. They strapped large pieces of bronze armor to their chests and backs, and also had curved armor plates on their arms and lower legs. But what truly made my breath hitch was what they started bringing out of the tents. Spears. Not the short spears used by the Xiongnu people, nor the long halberds of the Qin army. The wooden shafts of the spears were a full head taller than a man, topped with sharp bronze spearheads. Those soldiers, in groups of 2, carried bundles of spears toward the open space in the center of the camp. Several men were already standing in the open space, wearing more exquisite armor and helmets with plumes. Their flag bore the classic Macedonian, sun eagle emblem. They were shouting something, and fragments of the sound drifted over with the wind. It was a completely unfamiliar Greek prayer. The phalanx completed a turn, facing directly toward our direction. I noticed a simple altar at the edge of the camp, where several people looking like priests held spears in a circle, burning Persian textiles in the center while chanting. The soldiers began to assemble. Not crowding together in a chaotic mess, but like pieces on a chessboard, they quickly and accurately found their positions. 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows. They stood shoulder to shoulder in a dense formation, with about 30 men in each row. The distance between the front and back rows was very small, almost pressed together. My throat felt dry. Then, a horn sounded. Not the sharp copper horn we heard last night, but a deeper, more resonant horn blast. With the sound of the horn, the first row of soldiers leveled their spears in unison, the spearheads pointing forward. The spears of the second row extended through the gaps between the shoulders of the soldiers in the first row, and the third row was higher still. In the blink of an eye, a wall made of bronze spearheads, glinting with a cold light, appeared in that open space. A moving wall. The horn's rhythm changed. That wall began to move forward. Not with scattered steps, but with uniform, synchronized marching, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. Hundreds of feet lifted simultaneously and landed at the same time, emitting a heavy, unified, muffled thud. Boom, boom, boom. The sound traveled across 3 or 4 li, still making my chest numb with vibration. The phalanx slowly turned, advanced, retreated, separated, and closed up on the open ground. Every movement was as precise as if measured with a ruler, and every row of soldiers seemed connected by invisible threads. The spearheads remained perfectly level, merging into a dizzying expanse of metallic reflection under the sun. I have seen the Qin army drill, and I have seen the Xiongnu cavalry charge. But this formation before my eyes, this discipline, this almost mechanical uniformity. This is simply not what an army of this era should look like. My mother, Xuanzi murmured, his hands shaking. Old Bangzi's face was deathly pale, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes fixed on that moving phalanx as if looking at something that shouldn't exist in this world. The phalanx completed a turn, facing directly toward our direction. The distance was too great for me to see the soldiers' faces, but I could feel an aura that crushed everything. The sun had fully risen, shining on the dense forest of bronze spearheads, reflecting millions of blinding points of light. In that moment, I felt, in a daze, that it wasn't an army, but a massive, primeval beast slowly opening its eyes, looking toward the east. Looking toward the Great Wall. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest, my palms covered in cold sweat. Scarface asked who they really were. Now, I have the answer. An answer that makes my whole body run cold. We practically rolled down the slope. Old Bangzi was the first to stand up, his face ashen. He didn't speak, but simply waved towards the camp, then took off running. Not walking, but running, a run with all his might. Xuanzi and I exchanged a glance and followed. The way back to camp was 1,000 times longer than the way there. With each step, the image of that wall of bronze spear tips filled my mind, along with the perfectly synchronized sound of our footsteps. The wind whistled in my ears, but I felt I could still hear that clanging sound behind me. When we reached the point where we could see the outline of the Great Wall, my lungs felt like they were on fire, and my throat tasted like blood. But I didn't stop, and neither did Xuanzi. Old Bangzi was running in the lead. That veteran in his 50s was now running faster than the two of us young people. The camp gate opened as we approached. Scarface stood at the entrance, followed by several officers. He watched the 3 of us tumble and stumble in, didn't curse, but simply asked in a deep voice, "What did you see?" Old Bangzi leaned against the fence, panting, unable to utter a single word. Xuanzi slumped to the ground, his lips trembling. I leaned against the wooden pillar, took a few deep breaths, and forced myself to speak. "Centurion, they are training." "What kind of training?" "Phalanx." I uttered those 2 words, feeling a bitter taste on my tongue. Hundreds of people, standing in dense formations of phalanx, holding very long spears. They marched in unison, turned in unison, as orderly as one person. Scarface's pupils contracted slightly. "How long is the spear?" "Taller than a person, by a lot." I gestured with my hands. "The front row can hold their arms out horizontally, the back row can extend out from the gap between their shoulders, and the back row is even taller, like a wall, full of spearheads." The officers exchanged glances, and one of them muttered something under his breath. "Are you sure you saw it clearly?" Scarface stared at me. "Not Xiongnu people." "Absolutely not." I shook my head. "The Xiongnu people don't stand in formation like that, nor do they use those spears. Their armor is large bronze plates, breastplate, backplate, leg plates, and helmets with feathers on them." The camp gate was deathly silent. There was only the sound of the wind and our 3 heavy breathing. "How many people?" Scarface asked. "There were probably 300 to 500 people training today," Old Bangzi finally recovered and said in a hoarse voice, "but the size of the camp, I underestimated it yesterday. Now it looks like at least 8,000, maybe even more than 10,000. "Tens of thousands," a military officer gasped. Scarface remained silent for a long time. He looked up at the sky. The sun was already high in the sky, and then said, "You three, go eat, then rest. No drills or wall repairs today." He paused, then lowered his voice even further. "What you saw and heard today, you are not to tell anyone else. Wait for my orders." But how could I not say it? As we trudged toward the earthen hut, people in the camp were already peering out. Big Ox was the first to rush over, grabbing Xuanzi's arm. "So, what did you see?" Xuanzi opened his mouth, glanced at old Bangzi, and then closed it again. "Let's go eat first." Old Bangzi pushed Big Ox away. But when we got to the dining area, everyone gathered around. It wasn't just the few of us from our room, it was most of the garrison soldiers in the camp. They held their bowls, their eyes fixed on the three of us. "Old Bangzi, what exactly happened? I heard you went out again. Is there really something in the northwest?" One question after another came crashing down on him. Old Bangzi silently drank his porridge, not uttering a word. Xuanzi's hand holding the bowl trembled, spilling some porridge. I took a bite of the dry rations. They were as hard as rocks, and I chewed them for a long time without being able to swallow them. Qin Shaofan, a veteran who wasn't usually talkative, spoke up. "Tell me, what did you see?" Everyone was looking at me. I put down my bowl and looked at those faces, etched with wrinkles by the wind and sand, their eyes bloodshot and weary. They, like me, were conscripted garrison soldiers, guarding this earthen wall, not knowing when the Tao would die. I saw it. I heard my own voice dry and unfamiliar. "An army. An army unlike ours. How is it different?" someone asked. "They lined up as if they'd been measured with a ruler," I said. The spears they held were terrifyingly long. The sound of their footsteps, hundreds of them, sounded like one person. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then erupted in chaos. What kind of spear can be that long? What's the use of standing in neat rows? What matters in war is courage. Xiongnu people also line up. They're not Xiongnu people. Old Bangzi finally spoke, putting down his bowl. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone fell silent. "I've been a garrison soldiers for 30 years, and I've never seen soldiers like that. They're not bandits who come to plunder, nor are they nomadic tribes, they're a real, fighting army." "What do they want?" Big Ox asked. "To attack us." "I don't know," Old Bangzi shook his head. "But they are training and preparing. The camp is set up so neatly, it doesn't look like they're just passing through." Panic, like ink dripping into clear water, began to spread silently. After lunch, no one could rest. The camp was filled with people whispering to each other. They gathered in groups of 3 or 5, their voices low, but their expressions betrayed their confusion, fear, and unease. I sat at the doorway of the earthen house, watching all of this. Xuanzi squatted beside me, unconsciously drawing lines on the ground with a wooden stick. "Xiaofan," he suddenly said, "do you think we can hold out?" I didn't answer. This is a question that probably everyone in the camp is thinking about. We, about 200 men, were guarding a small section of the Great Wall that had fallen into disrepair over the years. On the other side was a terrifyingly well-equipped and disciplined unfamiliar army of tens of thousands. "Can we hold on? Scarface will figure something out," I said finally, but I didn't even believe it myself. In the afternoon, Scarface summoned all the officers to his earthen hut and spoke behind closed doors for a full hour. When they emerged, everyone's faces were even more grim. Scarface began issuing orders. Increase the arrow reserves, inspect all crossbows, reinforce the camp gates and fences, dig pits around the camp. Preparing for war. These 2 words weighed on everyone's heart like a stone. Panic began to simmer, giving rise to all sorts of speculation. Some said it was a newly risen barbarian tribe from the north, others said it was an army sent by a country in the western regions, and still others said it was a southern barbarian tribe that had come around by sea, even though we are thousands of miles from the sea. The most outrageous rumor comes from an old soldier known as Blind Wang. In his youth, he traveled through the western regions with a caravan and supposedly heard drunkards spouting nonsense in taverns. "Those people with white skin and blue eyes," Blind Wang said mysteriously to the people surrounding him, "come from the place where the sun sets. The gods they believe in are different from ours. They perform sacrifices before battles and play a strange instrument called a horn." "Have you seen it?" someone asked. "I've never seen him, but I've heard," Wang the blind man said in a low voice, "that they have a king, a war god, who led his army all the way from the west and destroyed dozens of countries. Some say he's already reached Yuaji. Yuaji, that place, 1,000 miles west of the western regions. If they really are attacking from further east of Ueg. How far has this army gone? Which countries have they conquered? Why is this never mentioned in historical records? Nobody knows the answer to Tao. In the evening, I was on duty repairing the watchtower. Standing on the watchtower, I could see to the northwest. As darkness fell, the Gobi Desert sank into twilight, and nothing could be seen. But I knew Tao, there was an army there, setting up camp, making fires, and perhaps sharpening their spears. What are you looking at? A voice came from behind. I turned around, and there was Big Ox. He had also been sent to fix the watchtower. It's nothing, I said. Big Ox walked over to me, leaned against the wooden railing, and gazed into the distance. What do you think they look like? Really white-skinned, blue-eyed. I don't know who Tao is, I said honestly. He's too far away, I can't see his face clearly. What if they call? Big Ox paused. What do we do? I fell silent. What to do? Run. Where to run? Behind us is the Great Wall. Beyond that, hundreds of miles of desolate wilderness, and then the counties. Deserters are killed if caught, and even if they escape back, losing the border is a serious crime, and their families might be implicated. Defend. How do we defend? Just follow orders. That was all I could say in the end. Big Ox gave a wry smile. That's true. What can we lowly soldiers do besides follow orders? As night fell, the campsite was unusually quiet. Usually, after dinner, there would be singing, wrestling, and people chatting. Tonight, everyone went back to their mud huts early, but no one could sleep. I lay on the straw mat, listening to Xuanzi tossing and turning, Big Ox's heavy breathing, and old Bangzi's occasional sigh. Outside, the wind still blew. But tonight's wind seems to carry something new that wasn't there before. Or perhaps, it's just my imagination. The seeds of panic have been sown. It takes root and sprouts in everyone's heart, growing vines called unknown, and fear, tightly binding everyone's heart. Beyond the Great Wall, in the dark Gobi Desert, that army slumbers. Or, it is awakening. Panic spread like wildfire throughout the night in the camp. The next morning, no one was in the mood for training anymore. Scarface stood on the drill ground, looking at the garrison soldiers below, staggering and dazed, and surprisingly, he didn't yell at them. He just stood there silently for a while, then waved his hand, disperse. Go back to what you were doing. Those who are repairing the wall, continue repairing the wall. Those who are preparing arrows, continue preparing arrows. But everyone was distracted. As I walked toward Watchtower carrying a bundle of newly sharpened arrow shafts, the scene I had witnessed yesterday was still replaying in my mind. The wall made of bronze spear tips, the uniform sound of marching, and the oppressive feeling of an army that didn't seem like a living force. Wrong. That's not right. I leaned the arrow shaft against the wall of the watchtower, climbed the wooden ladder, and stood on the watchtower's observation platform. To the northwest, the Gobi Desert shimmered gray in the morning light, and nothing could be seen in the distance. But I knew Tao. They were there. Alexander's Eastern Expedition. Macedonian Phalanx. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples hard. The history I'd learned in the 21st century swirled in my head like a broken cassette tape. In 334 BC, Alexander III led his army on an eastern expedition. 10 years to destroy Persia Empire, conquered the India River Valley. In 323 BC, Alexander died in Babylon, the empire split, and the eastern expeditions ended. He had never been to China. It's written in black and white in the history textbook. The teacher emphasized it by tapping the blackboard. Students, pay attention. Alexander's furthest expedition reached the India River, but he didn't enter Chinese territory. This is a key point for the exam. So what is that army lying outside the Great Wall now? A ghost. Xiao Fan, what are you daydreaming about? Xuanzi's voice came from below. He climbed up carrying a bucket of tung oil and began to oil the crossbow's axle. It's nothing. I shook my head, took the brush he handed me, and began mechanically applying the oil. The pungent smell of tung oil filled my nostrils, but my mind was elsewhere. I stared at the greasy brush in my hand, my mind frantically searching for all my memories of Macedonian phalanx, the information I had researched for my thesis in college, the posts I had read on military forums while people were bragging, and all the obscure facts I thought I would never use in my life. The Macedonian phalanx, centered around the sarissa spear, was approximately 4 to 6 meters long. Yes, much taller than a person. Soldiers stood in close formation, the front ranks holding their spears horizontally, while the rear ranks extended from the gaps, forming a wall of spears. The phalanx moved slowly, but its frontal impact was extremely powerful, pushing forward like a spiked wall. The armor was originally made of bronze, but was later replaced with iron. The helmet was decorated with feathers, and the shield was round and hung on the left arm. There are also auxiliary units, light infantry, archers, cavalry, and especially the famous companion cavalry. My movements slowed down. If that really was Macedonian phalanx, how did this army end up here? Historically, after Alexander's death, his empire split. Seleucus dynasty, Ptolemy dynasty, Antigonus dynasty. No one continued the eastward expedition. Moreover, from the India River to the Hexi corridor, there lies the entire Pamir Plateau, the Taklamakan Desert, and countless mountains and rivers whose names I don't even know. How did they get here? Did we take the wrong turn? No, history books say Alexander withdrew his troops from India because the soldiers were weary of war. What if he hadn't withdrawn? What if he had forced the army to continue eastward? The brush in my hand fell into the bucket with a thud. Be careful. Xuanzi looked at the splattered tongue oil with concern. This oil is very precious. I'm sorry. I picked up the brush, my heart pounding in my chest. If Alexander really does continue eastward, what happened after that? Where was this army when Qin conquered the 6 states? Where were they when the first emperor of Qin unified the country? Why is there not a single word about it in historical records? Has history gone completely off track from the moment I began my transmigration? No, wait a minute. My transmigration point is the Qin dynasty, the 33rd year of the first emperor's reign. According to the original history, the first emperor of Qin was still alive at this time, building the Great Wall, constructing his mausoleum, and seeking immortality through alchemy. In a few years, he would die, the Qin dynasty would fall, and the Chu-Han contention would begin. But what if a Macedonian army unit were to reach the foot of the Great Wall at this time? Will history continue in the same way? Xuanzi, I suddenly said, what do you think would happen if a particularly powerful army attacked and we couldn't hold out? Xuanzi paused for a moment, then smiled bitterly. What can we do? Either die in battle or be captured. As for being a prisoner, it depends on luck. We might be sold into slavery, buried alive, or incorporated into the army. What if they win and continue eastward? I pressed. They'll fight their way to Guangzhong, to Shenyang. Wouldn't that mean the country would perish? Xuanzi gave me a strange look. Xiao Fan, why are you asking such ominous questions today? Quote. I didn't answer, I just continued applying the oil, but my hands were trembling slightly. The country was destroyed. The Qin dynasty perished prematurely. Did the Han dynasty follow? Did the 3 kingdoms, Jin, and northern and southern dynasties follow? Did the Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties follow? Is my historical knowledge still of any use? This thought hit me like a bucket of ice water. What is my greatest asset? It's my vague understanding of the future course of history. I know now the Qin dynasty was nearing its end. I knew that Liu Bang and Xiongyu would vie for the throne, and that the Han dynasty would be established. Although I can't recall the specific details, I know the general outline. But now, an army that shouldn't be there has appeared in a place it shouldn't be. Then I know that everything about Dao could become worthless. I muttered under my breath. What did you say? Xuanzi asked. It's nothing. I shook my head, forcing myself to calm down. Now is not the time to dwell on whether history was right or wrong. The question now is how I am going to survive. That army, whether it was Macedonian phalanx or not, and regardless of how it came to be, is there now. And judging from the formation they've been training, they're not here for sightseeing. They will attack, soon. How long can we, with only 200 or so men, hold out against a small section of the Great Wall? 1 day, 2 days, or half a day. I put down the brush and walked to the lookout point of the watchtower, gazing northwest. The Gobi Desert shimmered under the sun, the distant horizon slightly distorted. I couldn't see anything, but the oppressive feeling was palpable even from this distance. If it really is Macedonian phalanx. I remember reading about a battle, what was it called again? Right, the Battle of Gaugamela. Macedonian phalanx faced off against a Persian army. The Persians had a significant numerical advantage, but phalanx held off the cavalry charge, and then what happened? I tried hard to recall. My memory was hazy, but I remembered that phalanx seemed to have a weakness, its flanks. Yes, phalanx was strong in the front, but vulnerable on the sides and rear. Once cavalry charged in from the flanks, its formation would fall apart. Furthermore, phalanx has very specific terrain requirements. It needs flat, open ground without any obstacles. In mountainous or complex terrain, phalanx cannot be effectively used. We're in the Gobi Desert, which is relatively flat. But the terrain at the foot of the Great Wall is actually quite complex, with ravines, earthen slopes, and piles of rocks. Moreover, we have city walls. Although it was just an earthen wall, it was still a wall. No matter how powerful Phalanx was, he was still an infantryman. If they wanted to attack the city, they had to abandon their formation and become skirmishers. And our crossbow bolt. My thoughts gradually became clearer. History may be wrong, but the laws of physics are not. Even the mighty Macedonian phalanx employed tactics from over 2,000 years ago. They had advantages and weaknesses. And now I stand atop the Great Wall, with crossbows, arrows, and the wall itself. And there's one thing they absolutely don't have. I know who Dao and the others are. I know Dao's general tactics. I know their weaknesses. This realization calmed me down a bit. Yes, history might have gone astray, but my knowledge wasn't entirely useless. At least, I knew what was on the other side of Dao. Xiao Fan, what are you laughing at? Xuanzi asked. I touched my face and realized that the corners of my mouth were turning up. It's nothing, I said. I just feel, things might not be as bad as we think. Isn't this bad? Xuanzi's eyes widened. An army of tens of thousands blocking the gate, isn't this bad? It's pretty bad. I picked up the brush again and began carefully applying oil to crossbow. But even if it's bad, we still have to find a way to survive, right? Xuanzi looked at me like I was a madman. But I don't care. So what if history is wrong? They transmigrated. Macedonian phalanx has reached the foot of the Great Wall. The first emperor of Qin will probably soon learn that there are still people with white skin and blue eyes in the world. Since everything is in chaos, then why not make it even more chaotic? Anyway, I've already died once. This time, I'm determined to survive, no matter what. By the time I had applied the oil for the third time, the outline of my plan was as clear as the scar on Scarface. No, it's not a plan. It is a guide to survival, a survival strategy from an ordinary 21st century office worker facing a professional killing machine from the 3rd century BC. As I mechanically brushed on the tung oil, I made a list in my mind. Given conditions: enemy, suspected Macedonian phalanx, numbering between 8,000 and 10,000, well-equipped and highly disciplined, a direct confrontation would be suicidal. Our side, the garrison soldiers number around 200, armed with crossbows, shortbows, bronze swords, and spears. The city walls are rammed earth, not high, but present. The terrain is the Gobi Desert at the foot of the Great Wall, with ravines, earthen slopes, and piles of rocks. Our advantage perhaps I know who Dao and his group might be, I roughly know their tactics, and, most importantly, I don't want to die. Core principles: never engage in direct combat. Delay as much as possible, wear them down, and deceive them if you can. Drag it out until reinforcements arrive, if any, wear them down until they have to make up for the problems, hopefully, and deceive them into thinking the defenses here are too strong to launch a direct attack. Dream on. Specific operational approach. Step 1. Utilize the terrain. This is the most important point. Macedonian phalanx requires flat, open ground to unfold. This area at the foot of the Great Wall looks flat, but upon closer inspection, it's full of pits. I remember what I saw during yesterday's reconnaissance. North of the slope east of the camp, there was a dry riverbed. The riverbed wasn't deep, but the banks were loose sand and gravel. The riverbed extended eastward, leading right to a gap in our section of the Great Wall. That gap was partially washed away by rain last year and was hastily plugged up with wooden fences and sandbags, but it wasn't very sturdy. What if we could lure their phalanx to the vicinity of the riverbed? The loose sand would slow them down, and the gravel would disrupt their formation. Even the slightest impact would be enough. Step 2. Leverage the advantages of remote access. I recall the data saying the Qin crossbow's effective range was about 150 to 200 paces. Even the Macedonian phalanx's spears, no matter how long, couldn't reach that distance. As soon as they enter the crossbow bolt's range, we'll fire. The goal isn't to kill many, but to disrupt their formation and create chaos. I stopped brushing my hand, especially their commander. Macedonian phalanx relied on tight command. Those wearing feathered helmets and standing to phalanx's side or behind were likely officers. if they could be given special attention using the crossbow bolt. Step 3. City wall defense. The rammed earth wall wasn't high, but it still took time to climb. The phalanx soldiers, clad in bronze armor and carrying spears, found climbing difficult. They had to put down their spears or switch to shorter weapons. This transition period was their opportunity. We could prepare logs and stones on the city walls. No, there aren't many big trees or stones here. But we can use other things. For example, fire. The Gobi Desert is mostly covered in withered grass and shrubs. Bundles of dry grass are soaked in tung oil, set on fire, and thrown down. Bronze armor protects against swords, but not fire. Even the most disciplined formation will crumble if someone is on fire. Step 4. Psychological warfare. This is the move I'm least confident about, but it might be the most effective. The Macedonian army had come from afar, thousands of miles from home, unable to speak the language and unfamiliar with the terrain. They looked at Aura with fierce determination, but they were certainly also apprehensive. Who knew how many troops were guarding the Great Wall of China? Who knew how many troops were behind the Great Wall of China? What other strange weapons did the Qin army possess? We can create a false impression. For example, plant more flags on the Great Wall. Right now, each watchtower only has one tattered flag. We can make several more, even rags will do, and tie them to long poles so that from a distance it looks like there are many people stationed there. For example, light more campfires at night to make the camp appear larger from a distance. For example, occasionally blow a horn at night, but not regularly, so that they can't guess what we're doing. These methods are naive, but effective. People are prone to scaring themselves in unfamiliar environments. Finally, and most importantly, the escape route. If all the above methods fail and the city walls are breached, we must have a way out. Behind the camp, inside the Great Wall, a path leads to a valley to the south. The valley contains water and caves, providing shelter. This is the last place, Dao, as old Bangzi previously mentioned, a place the garrison soldiers privately knew about. But the road is very narrow, and only one person can pass at a time. If it really comes to that, who goes first and who stays behind will be a problem. Moreover, escaping into the valley was only a temporary measure. Without food and supplies, they would have to come out sooner or later. Therefore, it's best not to go that far. I tossed the brush back into the bucket and looked at the crossbow, now gleaming with oil. The crossbow arm was made of hardwood, the string of which was made of ox sinew, and the trigger was bronze. It was simple, primitive, but in this era, it was a sharp weapon for killing. I tossed the brush back into the bucket and looked at the crossbow, now gleaming with oil. The survival guide, in my mind, was still being refined, but when I first drew the pit plan, I calculated the pit width as 1 foot, which old Bangzi immediately pointed out. Spearmen have a long stride, at least 1.5 feet is needed to be effective. It took 3 revisions to finalize the plan. This is really weird, I muttered to myself. What the hell? Xuanzi leaned closer. You've been talking to yourself the whole time. Are you possessed? I looked at him. This young man from Guangzhong, around 18 or 19 years old, still had a hint of childishness on his face, but his eyes already held the numbness and weariness characteristic of the garrison soldiers. He probably never imagined in his life that he would face a strange army from thousands of miles away. Xuanzi, I said, if we don't have to fight them head on, but just shoot arrows, throw stones, and set fires to scare them from a distance, how long do you think we can hold out? Xuanzi paused for a moment, then thought about it seriously. That depends on how ruthless they are. If they are not afraid of death and charge straight at us, even if we run out of arrows and stones, the fire won't burn for long, maybe 2 or 3 days at most. What if they don't dare to charge? I asked. What if we make them think that we have a lot of people, the walls are very strong, and that many people will die if we take it down? Then they might surround us, Xuanzi said. They'll surround us but not attack, waiting for us to run out of food, or waiting for reinforcements. Do we have reinforcements? Xuanzi smiled wryly. Even if we send troops from the nearest BD commandery camp, it would take 5 or 6 days by fast horse. Besides, this section of the Great Wall is not important, and the prefect may not be willing to send troops. That means there are no reinforcements. I nodded. The last piece of the puzzle in my mind had been completed. We cannot count on reinforcements. We cannot expect the enemy to be cowardly. We can only rely on ourselves, using every means possible to buy time. We must stall until the enemy loses patience, until the enemy raises further questions, until something unexpected happens. What variables? I don't know, Dao. Perhaps it's the weather, perhaps the terrain, perhaps there's a problem within the enemy's ranks, perhaps a miracle. Xiao Fan, Xuanzi looked at me. Do you have something on your mind? I hesitated for a moment. It's too early to say this now. My thoughts are half based on memory and half on guesswork, and no one will believe me if I say them. Besides, I'm just an ordinary garrison soldier. I'm not qualified to talk about any strategies. It's just wishful thinking, I said finally. Anyway, I don't want to die. Who wants to die? Xuanzi sighed. My mother is still waiting for me at home. He paused, then said, but if I'm really going to die, I should take a few down with me. I can't die in vain. I looked at him and suddenly smiled. Yes, they can't have died in vain. But it's best not to die. I picked up the brush again and started brushing the crossbow's sights. The survival guide, in my mind, was still being refined, adding more details and considering more possibilities. The smell of tung oil is still as pungent as ever, but I've gotten used to it. Outside the Great Wall, that army is still there. So what if history goes astray? My survival plan had been swirling in my mind for 3 days, and I finally couldn't hold back anymore. That afternoon, while they were repairing the city wall, Xuanzi and I were responsible for carrying a basket of rubble to the base of the wall. The sun in the Gobi Desert was so intense it could make your skin peel, but as I carried the basket, my mind was still preoccupied with other things. Was the riverbed wide enough to trip phalanx? How much tung oil was left to make torches? What color rags should be used for the camouflage flags? Xuanzi, I said, panting, as I dumped the rubble on the ground and wiped the sweat from my brow with my sleeve, what if we widened that gap a bit more, and then dug a few shallow trenches in front, not too deep, just enough to trip them up? When those spearmen come over, chaos will ensue. Dig open the breach. Xuanzi looked at me like I was crazy. Xiao Fan, are you out of your mind? We finally managed to seal that breach. If we dig it open again, won't that just let them in? It's not really letting them in, I tried to explain, it's a trap. You see, they're walking in a line, right? They're walking neatly, but not nimbly. We'll dig a trench in front of the gap, not deep, just a foot, but we'll put some gravel and sharp pieces of wood in it. When they come over, the first one in the front row will step in and twist their ankle. And then, an old soldier who was building adobe bricks nearby overheard this and interjected. He twisted his ankle, but the people behind him just followed. There are tens of thousands of people, what good are a few twisted ankles? Not just a few. I put down my basket and gestured. Their formation is dense. If the front ranks break up, the back ranks have to stop, and if they stop, the whole formation gets crammed together. That's when we can fire arrows from the city wall, specifically targeting the huddled areas. One arrow can pierce 2 or 3. You wish, the veteran scoffed. Are they wooden figures, standing there for you to shoot? Besides, don't they have archers? The moment you show your face, their arrows will be at you. So we need to hide first, I continued, and then show ourselves when they get into disarray. And their archers, I remember the Macedonian army didn't have many archers, mostly support archers. What? Ton. Another garrison soldiers chimed in. What did you say? I got stuck. Macedonia. The word had been swirling in my head for days, but when I said it, no one understood. It's those white-skinned people, I corrected myself. I heard old Bangzi say they're called Macedonia people. Old Bangzi said that. The veteran was skeptical. He really called him that. It seems so. I mumbled. Anyway, they probably don't have many archers. They mainly rely on spears phalanx. A crowd gradually gathered. The work on the city wall had stopped, and a dozen or so garrison soldiers were looking at me with curiosity, but even more so with suspicion. Xiao Fan, how do you know all this? Xuanzi asked in a low voice. Have you seen them before? No, I told the truth, I was just guessing. Guessing blindly, a burly man called. Dark skin, snorted. You think you can guess what weapons they use and how many archers they have? Do you think you're a shaman in a temple? A few low laughs rang out from the surrounding area. My face was burning a little, but I still forced myself to say, it's not a guess, it's deduction. Think about it, they're carrying such long spears, they have to walk in a line, how could they have hands to hold a bow? Archers would definitely need to be provided separately, but there wouldn't be too many of them, otherwise the line would be in chaos. So what? Dark-Skin persisted. Even if we have fewer archers, they have tens of thousands. One of them could spit on us and drown us. Digging a few trenches and we'll win. Dream on. I'm not talking about winning, I explained, I mean stalling for time. Our goal isn't to win, it's to hold them off until they fix the problems or until reinforcements arrive. Where are the reinforcements coming from? A tall, thin garrison soldier sneered. The beady commandery is 500 miles away. By the time they arrive, the grass on our graves will be 3 feet tall. We still have to delay it. I insisted. Delaying it for 1 day is better than charging in headfirst to our deaths. Going to your death. Dark-Skin's voice rose. A soldier who's afraid of dying. If you're afraid of dying, what kind of garrison soldiers are you? Go home and farm. These words hit a nerve. The expressions on the faces of the other garrison soldiers around them turned grim. It's not that I'm afraid of death, I took a deep breath, I just don't want to die in vain. Our 200 men would be wiped out in a quarter of an hour fighting 10,000. But if we use our brains and strategize, maybe we can hold out a few more days and kill a few more enemies. A strategy. An old soldier who hadn't spoken until now finally spoke. His name was Old Chen, the oldest among the garrison soldiers. He wasn't a man of many words, but everyone respected him. Qin Xiaofan, have you read any military books? I paused for a moment, then said, no. So, is your master a general? Or a strategist? No, not exactly. So where did you learn all the zeshems? Old Chen stared at me, his eyes like knives. Digging trenches, setting fires, planting more flags. These things sound like children playing house. In war, you rely on courage, discipline, and the sword in your hand. Trying to be clever will only get you killed faster. A chorus of agreement erupted around him. Exactly, there aren't that many twists and turns in war. Digging a ditch. That's hilarious, can't people just walk around it? Setting fires. If you light a fire on the Gobi Desert, the wind might blow it and burn you up. Standing in the middle of the crowd, I felt my face growing hotter and hotter. Those plans that seemed so sophisticated in their minds, once spoken aloud, were undeniably naive and laughable. Especially coming from the mouths of these veterans who had actually fought and seen blood, they sounded more like the delusions of a greenhorn who had never been on the battlefield. I wanted to explain, but I didn't know what Dao should say. All right, Xuanzi tugged at my arm. Xiaofan meant well, he wanted everyone to live. Let's all go home, the work isn't finished yet. The crowd slowly dispersed, but the chatter continued. Qin Xiaofan has been acting a bit strange lately. I heard that's how they were after the last reconnaissance mission, acting all mysterious. He's probably terrified. They might be possessed by an evil spirit. I kept my head down and continued moving stones. My palms ached from the rough basket ropes, but the pain was even worse from the frustration in my heart. I know my ideas are immature, and I know my plans are full of flaws. But I just want to survive. I want everyone to survive. Was I wrong? After finishing work in the afternoon, I sat at the door of the earthen hut, watching the people coming and going in the camp. Everyone was in a hurry, their faces full of anxiety, but no one mentioned digging ditches or setting fires anymore. Scarface gave a new order. Starting tomorrow, everyone will practice defending the city walls, using real arrows to shoot at grass targets 50 paces away. This is the familiar way garrison soldiers prepare for war, practice archery, sharpen their swords, and fortify their walls. Simple, direct, and requires no thought. Xiaofan, old Bangzi sat down next to me at some point and handed me a piece of dry food. Don't take it to heart. I took the dry rations without saying a word. What you said, old Bangzi paused, actually makes some sense. I raised my head. When I was young, I worked with caravans, old Bangzi said slowly. I saw some small kingdoms in the western regions fighting. They were outnumbered and couldn't beat the big ones, so they used all sorts of methods. Digging traps, shooting arrows from the shadows, launching night raids. Although they were underhanded, they were sometimes really effective. Then why? I asked, puzzled, why does everyone think I'm talking nonsense? Because you're not a general, old Bangzi looked at me, nor a strategist. You're just a garrison soldier. A garrison soldier's job is to follow orders, defend the walls, and kill the enemy. Giving advice is for those above. He patted me on the shoulder. The idea is right, but the timing is wrong. Once the fight really starts, Scarface will naturally figure something out. Then you can tell him your idea, and it might be useful. But if we wait until then, it will be too late, I said. There's nothing we can do about it. Old Bangsy stood up and dusted himself off. We're soldiers, not generals. Generals strategize and soldiers fight, each with their own duties. If you overstep your boundaries, trouble is bound to happen. He left, leaving me sitting alone at the door. As the sun set, it bathed the entire camp in a dark red glow. In the distance, the Great Wall resembled a massive scar in the twilight, stretching across the landscape. I know Dao Old Bangsy is right. I'm just a lowly soldier. In this era, in this place, a soldier doesn't need to have ideas, he only needs to obey. But I couldn't control myself. The fragments of Macedonian phalanx in my mind, the calculations about terrain, distance, and fire attacks, crawled around like worms, unable to stop. Maybe I really am possessed. Or perhaps, I just desperately want to live. As night fell, a campfire was lit in the camp. I sat by the fire, listening to the garrison soldiers around me chat. Their conversation had returned to the white people. What do they eat? What do they drink? What do they say? Are they afraid of dying in battle? No one mentioned my scheme anymore. It's as if the argument that happened this afternoon never actually happened. As I ate my dry rations and watched the leaping flames, the frustration in my heart slowly transformed into a strange sense of calm. All right, if you don't believe me, then forget it. But I have to earn my own destiny. When I was sent on night patrol, I was even a little relieved. At least I don't have to stay in the camp and see those suspicious or pitying looks. Scarface probably also thinks I've been thinking too much lately, so he simply assigned me a task to keep out of sight. Tonight from midnight to 1 a.m., patrol the eastern section of the Great Wall for 3 miles, keep watch over 3 beacon towers, and strike the clapper to report that everything is safe. It sounds simple, but only by walking on the Great Wall at night can one truly understand what simple means. Xuanzi was in my group. He carried a bundle of firewood, and I carried a clapper and a mallet. The light from the firewood only illuminated 3 steps ahead. Beyond that, there was only thick, impenetrable darkness. The wind howled through the walls, making strange, whistling noises, like countless people weeping softly. We walked along the rammed earth path atop the wall. The wall beneath our feet was only a little over 10 feet wide, with a parapet on the outside and a steep slope on the inside. We had to be careful as we walked, especially someone like me who wouldn't even dare to cross a log bridge before the transmigration. Xiao Fan, Xuanzi lowered his voice, do you think they might sneak over at night? I don't know, Dao. I told the truth, but a night raid by phalanx is unlikely. That thing can't leave at night. What if, in case, I grip the mallet tightly, we'll have to resort to banging the clapper to call for help. The first beacon tower was about 2 miles away. It was a square platform made of adobe bricks, higher than the city wall, with a pile of firewood and a brazier on top. We climbed up and checked if the firewood was dry and if there was any charcoal left in the brazier. Everything was normal. I stand on the beacon tower, gazing northwest. Tonight, the moon is dim and the stars are few. Nothing can be seen in the distance, only a deep darkness. But I know, Dao, that in that darkness, tens of thousands are sleeping, or awake. Let's go, Xuanzi said. We continued walking forward. The second beacon tower was at a corner. This section of the city wall had collapsed last year and was hastily repaired, leaving the road surface riddled with potholes. We walked with extra caution, the light from the bundle of firewood flickering between the potholes, casting long shadows on the wall. Halfway there, I suddenly stopped. What's wrong? Xuanzi asked. Listen, I said. The sound of the wind. Only the sound of the wind. But that's not right. The sound of the wind carried something else. The sound came from the northwest, carried by the night wind, close to the ground, and into my ears. Did you hear that? I whispered. Xuanzi listened intently for a while, then his expression changed. I heard it. What is that sound? We held our breath and leaned against the parapet, listening intently. The sound varied in volume, sometimes so clear it seemed right next door, sometimes so faint it was almost inaudible. But it was always there, deep and persistent, unlike any natural sound. It's not snoring, is it? Xuanzi's voice was dry. Tens of thousands of people snoring together. I shook my head. That wasn't snoring. Snoring isn't this even, not this, regular. Other elements began to appear in the sound. the gentle clanging of metal, like many pieces of iron or armor rubbing against each other, and the rustling of leather, like many people moving at the same time. "They're moving," I blurted out. "Moving around so late." Xuanzi grabbed my arm. "You're not about to attack, are you?" "I don't know, Dao." My heart started pounding. But Phalanx's nighttime relocation, that doesn't make sense. We lay prone on the parapet, staring intently in the direction the sound came from. The firewood had long since gone out. Xuanzi had said we couldn't reveal our location. Darkness enveloped us like thick ink. We could perceive nothing but the sound. The sound became clearer and clearer. Now it's clear that there are many footsteps, heavy, orderly, and rhythmically synchronized. It's not scattered movement, but a procession marching in formation. There's also the dull thud of spear shafts striking the ground, one after another, in sync with the footsteps. Boom, boom, boom. Even from at least 2 or 3 miles away, the sound still felt like it was hitting my chest. "They're conducting drills." Xuanzi's voice trembled. "Drills in the middle of the night. This isn't drill." I gritted my teeth. Drill wouldn't be this quiet. This is movement. Where to move? I tried to pinpoint the direction of the sound. At first it was coming from northwest, but now, it seems to be further east. Are they adjusting their direction? A terrible thought crept into my mind. They were looking for the breakthrough. This section of the Great Wall has been in disrepair for many years and has several weak points. The section we patrolled is relatively good. About 5 miles to the west, a section of more than 10 zhang, approximately 33 meters, was washed away by a flash flood last year. It was hastily patched up with wooden fences and sandbags, but it couldn't withstand the impact at all. If they find it there. Hurry up. I pulled Xuanzi up. Let's go to the third beacon tower. The view is better from there, we can see clearly. We practically ran along the city wall. The potholes, the darkness, and the constant danger of falling were all forgotten. Only one thought occupied our minds, to see where they were going. The third beacon tower was built on a high ground, the highest point of this section of the city wall. We climbed up, panting, and lay down at the lookout point. The sound is clearer. Now you can tell that the sound wasn't coming from a single direction. It sounded like several teams moving simultaneously, converging on the same point from different directions. "They're gathering," I murmured. "What are we gathering for?" Xuanzi asked, and then he understood. His breathing became rapid. The gathering was, of course, for the purpose of attacking. But why at night? Phalanx's biggest fear is poor visibility, which makes their formation prone to breakage. What advantages would a night attack have for them? Unless, a thought flashed through my mind, unless they were planning a sneak attack. Instead of launching a full-scale assault with Phalanx, light infantry or assault teams were sent under cover of night to infiltrate the city walls, breach the defenses, create an opening, and then the main force would advance. I whispered. They might send a small force ahead first. A small force. Xuanzi didn't understand. We don't need Phalanx, just a few dozen or a few hundred agile men, armed with short weapons, to climb the walls or breach the city gates, I explained. Once we're in disarray, the main force can then push forward. Xuanzi's face turned deathly pale. Then, what should we do? Knock on the clapper, I said. To sound the alarm. I grabbed the mallet, ready to strike. But I stopped halfway up. The sounding of the wooden clapper signaled to the entire camp that there was enemy activity. Everyone would be alerted and put on high alert. But what if they're just making normal rotations? What if this is just nighttime training? We banged the gong, waking everyone up, only to find it was a false alarm. What will Scar think? What will those garrison soldiers, who already suspected me of being mystical, say? Knock, Xuanzi urged. I hesitated. The sounds continued. Now, short commands could be heard in a completely unfamiliar language, but with a stern tone. The clanging of metal grew more frequent, like weapons being distributed. What are they preparing? They must be preparing something. Knock. I finally made up my mind. The wooden mallet struck the wooden clapper heavily. Bang, bang, bang. 3 sharp clangs of the gong carried far in the silent night. Soon, a response came from the distant camp, a horn sounded. Then came more horn calls, coming from different beacon towers. Firelight blazed across the camp, more and more, like a herd of beasts suddenly awakening and opening its eyes. We lay prone on the beacon tower, staring intently into the darkness. The sound suddenly stopped after the clapper was struck. It didn't gradually disappear, it came to an abrupt end. It was as if someone had covered everyone's mouths and held everyone's feet down. The thunderous footsteps, the metallic clangs, the commands that were ringing out just a second ago vanished completely the next. Only the sound of the wind remained. A deathly silence. Did they hear that? Xuanzi asked in a low voice. I nodded. Of course they heard it. In such a quiet night, the sound of the clapper could be heard for miles. They were in the darkness, and we discovered them. We also know that Dao, we have woken up. What will happen next? Attack, or retreat? We waited a long time. A quarter of an hour, then another quarter of an hour. The camp in the distance had fully awakened, torches forming a continuous line. Someone rode out of the camp gate, hurrying along the foot of the great wall towards us. It was Scarface who had sent someone to scout the situation. But from the darkness to the northwest, there was no more sound. The army that moved through the night seemed to have vanished into thin air, or perhaps, it had never existed at all. Did we mishear? Xuanzi asked in a low voice. I didn't answer. Did I hear that right? Those footsteps, those metallic sounds, those commands. No, it's impossible to have misheard. They were there, in the darkness. Stop and wait. What are we waiting for? I don't know Dao, but I know, Dao, after tonight, some things will never be the same again. The way Scarface looked at me was like he was looking at a troublesome kid. On the drill ground at dawn, the entire garrison soldiers' camp assembled. The torches hadn't completely died down, emitting wisps of smoke in the morning light. All eyes were on me, the one who had struck the clapper last night. Qin Xiaofan, Scarface's voice wasn't loud, but every word was like a stone hitting the ground. You said you heard enemy troops moving around at night. What exactly did you hear? Where did you hear it? Explain clearly. I swallowed hard. My throat was sore and dry, and my eyes, which hadn't slept all night, were incredibly sore. Around 11:45 a.m., I said, trying to keep my voice steady, between the second and third beacon towers, I heard a lot of footsteps, orderly and heavy. There were also the sounds of metal clashing, like armor or weapons. There were commands, which I couldn't understand, but they were definitely human voices. The sounds came from the northwest and moved eastward. How many people? Scarface asked. I can't tell, I said honestly. But the footsteps were very dense, like, at least several hundred people, maybe more. Why didn't you strike the gong immediately? I paused for a moment, then said, I knocked. How long did it take from hearing it to the sound of the gong? I recalled it. From hearing the sound, to running to the third beacon tower, to deciding to strike the gong, about a quarter of an hour. A low murmur arose around them. A quarter of an hour was enough for the enemy to do a lot. Why do we have to wait 15 minutes? Scarface stared at me. Because, I said hesitantly, because I want to confirm if they're really coming this way. If it's just nighttime training, banging the gong will alert the whole camp. Training, Scarface interrupted me. The enemy is less than 10 miles away from us, and you're conducting training at night. Qin Xiaofan, do you think I'm an idiot, or are you the idiot? I lowered my head and didn't say anything. From this moment on, Scar raised his voice, no longer looking at me but scanning the entire area. All drills and chores are cancelled. Everyone will do only 3 things. First, reinforce the city walls. Second, stockpile arrows. Third, be ready for battle at any time. He paused, his tone growing colder. The noise Qin Xiaofan heard last night, whether true or false, proves one thing: they are very close to us, close enough to be heard walking at night. They could come at any moment. The drill ground was completely silent. The city wall reinforcement will be divided into 3 groups. Scarface began assigning tasks. Group 1, dismantle all usable timber, door panels, and cart planks in the camp and transport them to the city wall to use as planks. Group 2, go to the riverbank to dig up clay, mix it with grass stems, and patch up all the cracks and holes in the city wall. Group 3. His gaze fell on me. Qin Xiaofan, you lead the third group. I raised my head. The third group is in charge of preparing arrows, Scarface said. Inspect all the crossbow bolts and bows and arrows in the camp. Straighten any bent shafts, sharpen any dull arrowheads, and replace any missing fletching. Also, make 500 new arrows. The shafts must be straight, the arrowheads must be sharp, and the fletching must be neat. If any of these are not met, they will be court-martialed. I opened my mouth, wanting to say something, but Scarface had already turned to someone else. After the meeting, the 15 men from the third group surrounded me. They were all the youngest or thinnest garrison soldiers in the camp, including Xuanzi. Scarface assigned this task to me, probably thinking it was the safest job, requiring no heavy lifting or climbing. But looking at these 15 faces, I had absolutely no idea what to expect. Make arrows. I can't even draw a crossbow properly, and now I'm supposed to lead people to make arrows. Xiao Fan, Xuanzi whispered, where should we begin? I took a deep breath and said, let's go to the warehouse first and see how much stock we have. The storehouse was a mud hut in the far corner of the camp, even more dilapidated than our own. Pushing open the door, a musty smell hit us. A dozen bundles of arrow shafts were piled on the floor, all whittled wooden shafts, but of varying thicknesses, some already bent. In the corner were several earthenware jars containing rusty bronze arrowheads. In another corner was a pile of feathers, mainly goose and pheasant feathers, grimy and matted together. That's all? Asked garrison soldiers, a young man nicknamed Dog. That's all. I squatted down and picked up an arrow shaft. It was made of elm wood, fairly straight, but the surface was rough with many splinters. The arrowheads are all rusted like this, another garrison soldier said, fiddling with the pottery jar. Can it still be used? I picked up an arrowhead. It was bronze, triangular, with a blunt tip and green verdigris along the edges. Could such an arrowhead penetrate flesh? Grind them, I said. Grind them all once. 500 arrows. The dog groaned. When will this end? Then stop wasting time, I stood up. Just send it up there and shoot it out when the battle starts. It won't pierce the enemy's armor, it will bounce back and hit your own face. No one spoke. We got to work. The storeroom was too small, so we had to move the items outside to the open space. 15 people were divided into 3 groups. One group sharpened arrowheads, one group repaired arrow shafts, and one group preened feathers. Sharpening arrowheads was the most tiring task. There were only a few whetstones in the camp, and they had to be used in shifts. Bronze arrowheads were hard, and sharpening them was strenuous, your hands would ache after a while. You also had to be careful not to over-sharpen them and wear down the edge. Repairing arrow shafts isn't easy either. You have to heat the bent shaft over a fire and then slowly straighten it. If you don't control the heat well, it either won't soften properly or it will burn. I tried several times, and either I used too much force and broke it, or I didn't straighten it enough and it remained bent. Grooming the feathers was the easiest part, but still a hassle. The feathers had to be sorted by size and shape, the dirty ones had to be washed clean, and the damaged ones thrown away. The water for washing the feathers quickly became murky, with a layer of oily grime floating on top. After working for less than an hour, I felt like cursing. What kind of lousy job is this? Scarface must have done it on purpose. He made me, this eccentric guy, let a bunch of old, weak, and disabled people to do manual labor here. When the enemy actually comes, we'll still be sharpening arrowheads, repairing arrow shafts, and washing feathers. Xiao Fan, Xuanzi leaned closer, holding a repaired arrow in her hand. Do you think this will do? I took it. The shaft was straight, the arrowhead was polished, and the fletching was glued on. It looked okay. Give it a try, I said. We found a grass target and set it up 30 paces away. Xuanzi picked up the crossbow, strung it, knocked an arrow, and aimed. The crossbow twanged, and the arrow flew out. Thud. The arrow struck the edge of the straw target, trembled a few times, but didn't fall. It's all right. Xuanzi ran over and pulled out the arrow, but the fletching is a bit crooked, so it wobbles when it flies. I took the arrow and examined it closely. Indeed, the fletching was not symmetrically attached, one side was higher than the other. Re-glue, I said. But we're running out of glue, said the man arranging the feathers. We only have about half a jar of fish glue left in the camp. Then let's use something else. I looked around. Paste, rice water. The batter doesn't stick together, one veteran said. The rice water is even worse, it dries out and becomes brittle. I thought about it. What kind of glue do modern crafts use? White glue, hot melt glue. I don't have either here. Boil tung oil, I suddenly said. Tung oil is sticky and dries slowly, but it becomes strong once it's dry. Tung oil is precious, the old soldier shook his head. Scarface won't agree to it. I'll go tell them. I put down the arrow and walked towards Scarface's earthen house. Scarface was inside looking at a sheepskin map, a pitifully crude map with only a few lines and circles. Seeing me come in, he didn't even look up. How's the arrow making going? We don't have enough glue, I said directly. We need to use tung oil. No, Scarface refused decisively. The tung oil is for applying to crossbow and lighting torches. Without glue, the fletching won't stick properly, and it'll fly off in all directions, I said. Applying crossbow doesn't require much tung oil. If we use it sparingly, it'll be enough to make arrows. Scarface raised his head and stared at me. Qin Shaofan, you've been meddling more and more lately. You want to give advice on building the city wall, and you want to give advice on making arrows. Do you really think you're someone important? I stood there, without saying a word. No tung oil. Scarface lowered his head and continued looking at the map. Find another way yourself. I turned to leave. Wait a minute, Scarface called out to me. Arrows, you must finish 300 by nightfall today. If you don't, everyone in your third group, you're not getting dinner. I gritted my teeth and said, yes. Back in the open space, all 15 people were looking at me. How is it? Xuanzi asked. No, I said. Find another way yourself. A chorus of wails filled the air. I knew it was Dao. What should we do? The batter is really no good. I tried it, and the feathers fell off after just 2 shots. I crouched down and looked at the materials on the ground. Arrow shafts, arrowheads, feathers. They were still missing glue. In the Gobi Desert, there's nothing but sand and rocks, so where would you find a natural adhesive? Etc. I remember watching a documentary before that said primitive people used animal skin to make glue. Or bones. What are we eating at the camp today? I asked. What else can we eat? The dog said, millet porridge and pickled vegetables. Do you have meat? Meat. Guzi laughed. Shaofan, are you dreaming? The gazelles we hunted last month are all gone, and now we don't even have rat meat. Well, I thought for a moment, are there any bones? Leftovers from before, the ones that were thrown away. The group looked at each other. Yes, there is, an old soldier said. There's a pit behind the camp, used for dumping garbage. Bones, hides, all sorts of things are thrown there. But it all stinks. Take me to see it, I said. The garbage pit was located at the northernmost part of the camp. It was a small, natural ditch. Even before getting close, a stench filled the air. The pit contained everything imaginable. Rags, broken pottery, bones, fur, and human excrement. Can this be used? Xuanzi covered his nose. I picked up a stick and rummaged through the pit. I found several relatively large bones, which looked like sheep or deer bones. They were dried out but not completely rotten. These are all. I picked out a dozen or so relatively clean ones. Take them back. What are you going to do with it? The dog asked. To make glue, I said. Back in the open space, we found a broken earthenware pot, smashed the bones, added water, and put it on the fire to boil. The water boiled, bubbling, and a strange, fishy smell wafted out. After simmering for half an hour, the water became cloudy, and a layer of oil floated on the surface. I turned down the heat and continued simmering. After boiling for another hour, the water was almost gone, leaving a layer of sticky, translucent stuff at the bottom of the pot. Is this glue? Xuanzi leaned closer to take a look. Try it. I used a stick to pick up a little bit, smeared it on the 2 pieces of wood, and pressed it down. After waiting a while, the glue dried. I tried to pry the wood pieces apart, but I couldn't. It's done, the dog exclaimed happily. We started using this, bone glue, to attach the fletchings. Although it smelled terrible and wasn't as sticky as fish glue, it was at least usable. The fletchings stuck on fairly well and didn't fall off immediately after being shot. For the rest of the time, everyone buried themselves in their work. Some sharpened arrowheads, some repaired arrow shafts, and some glued fletching. The sun slowly slanted westward from its zenith, casting ever longer shadows. Before nightfall, we made 320 arrows. When Scarface came to inspect the arrows, he didn't say anything. He casually picked up a few arrows, looked at them, weighed them in his hand, and then put them back. Let's go eat, he said, turning and leaving. The 15 of us collapsed to the ground, too exhausted to even stand up. But the millet porridge for dinner tasted especially delicious. I sat at the door of the earthen house, holding a bowl, watching the sky gradually darken in the distance. The military order has been issued. Preparations have begun. And I, a transmigrator who can't even properly draw a crossbow, am now leading a group to make arrows, waiting to welcome a professional army from thousands of miles away. It feels like kindergarten kids being sent to the Olympics. And it's a weightlifting event. They arrived the day after the arrows were made. It wasn't night, it was early morning. The sun had just climbed above the horizon, turning the Gobi Desert a dazzling golden hue. I was squatting in front of my earthen house, eating porridge, when suddenly I heard a distorted shout coming from the watchtower. They're here, they're here. The bowl fell to the ground, spilling millet porridge all over the floor. The camp erupted in chaos. Everyone dropped what they were holding, grabbed their weapons, and charged toward the city walls. Scarface's roar broke through the crowd. On the walls. On your positions. Crossbowmen, watchtower, spearmen, guard the crenellations. Hurry. I ran up the city wall with the crowd. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my palms were sweaty. By the time I reached the watchtower, my legs were weak. Then, I saw it. A line appeared on the northwestern horizon. A grayish-brown, slowly moving line. At first, it was just a blurry outline, like dust rising in the distance. But as the sun rose higher and the light brightened, the outline became clearer and clearer. It wasn't dust, it was people. Thousands upon thousands of people, lined up in neat rows of phalanx, were slowly advancing step by step towards the Great Wall. They were still quite far apart, about 7 or 8 miles. But even from that distance, you could feel the oppressive atmosphere. The front row was filled with countless spearheads, reflecting a cold, hard metallic luster in the sunlight, like a metal forest that had suddenly sprung up from the ground. Cavalrymen patrolled on both sides of phalanx, like 2 moving wings. Further on, you can see some what look like supply wagons, carrying something that's unclear. My goodness, a crossbowman murmured, how many people are there? No one answered. Everyone lay prone at the watchtower's lookout point, their eyes fixed on the slowly approaching, grayish-brown wave. Phalanx was advancing very slowly. Very slow. They didn't seem to be coming to attack, they seemed to be taking a stroll. Maintaining that chilling rhythm. Boom, 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 even from 7 or 8 miles away, I could almost hear their heavy footsteps. They're demonstrating, old Bangsy's voice came from the side. He had somehow gotten on the watchtower, his eyes narrowed as he stared into the distance. They're walking so slowly and steadily, just so we can see clearly how many of them there are, and how orderly they are. Then why don't you rush over here faster? Xuanzi asked, his voice trembling. Because there's no need, old Bangsy said. They know we can't escape. The Great Wall is right here, and so are we. If they move slowly, we'll just have to keep watching and waiting. The longer we wait, the more anxious we'll become. He was right. I could feel the garrison soldiers around me breathing more and more rapidly. Some were constantly wiping the sweat from their palms on their clothes, some were repeatedly checking their crossbows, and some were making meaningless swallowing noises. Fear is contagious. Scarface surveyed the city wall, his voice chillingly calm. Hold your ground. They're moving slowly, which is to our advantage. Crossbowmen, check the range markers. Spearmen, remember your positions. On my orders, no one is to move. But his calmness only made the atmosphere more tense. Phalanx is getting closer. Now more details are visible. The soldiers wear uniform grayish-brown short robes over bronze armor. The armor plates are large, covering their chests, abdomens, and backs, reflecting a dull light in the sunlight. Their helmets are adorned with feathers of various colors, which flutter slightly in the wind. Their formation was too neat. There were 30 men in a row horizontally, and countless rows vertically. It was impossible to count them from front to back, because the spear tips of the back rows extended from above the shoulders of the soldiers in the front rows, layer upon layer, forming a dense forest of spears. The cavalry on both sides of phalanx also began to change formation. They split into several small groups, moving back and forth in front of phalanx, as if scouting the terrain or showing off their horsemanship. They're looking for the breakthrough, Scarface said in a low voice from the watchtower next to me. Look, the cavalry are heading east, that's where the walls are weakest. Then I turned my head. We've already sent people to reinforce it, Scarface said, but there's not enough time. If they launch their attack before noon. He didn't finish speaking, but his meaning was clear. There isn't enough time. Phalanx was 1 mile closer. Now the faces of the soldiers in the front ranks are visible, though still blurry, their outlines are discernible. Their faces appear more defined than those of the Central Plains people, with higher noses and deeper set eyes. Some have light-colored hair peeking out from under their helmets, almost gleaming gold in the sunlight. Such fair skin. Xuanzi took a sip of qi. And there's a blonde one, another crossbowman muttered. Is that even human? This is a question that probably everyone wants to ask. The soldiers' appearance, equipment, and formation were completely different from those of the Central Plains people. They seemed to come from another world, bringing with them a completely unfamiliar way of fighting, appearing in the Gobi Desert, which should have been inhabited only by Xiongnu people. Phalanx stopped. About 5 miles from the Great Wall, the entire phalanx came to a sudden stop, as if receiving the same command. The procession of tens of thousands of people stopped cleanly and efficiently, without the slightest chaos. Then, the bugle sounded. It wasn't the Qin army's horn, but the sharp, resonant sound of a brass horn. The sound came from behind Phalanx, piercing the morning air and reaching the city walls clearly. As the horn sounded, Phalanx began to change. The soldiers in the front rank slammed their spears into the ground, the butts embedding themselves in the soil with a dull thud. The spears of the soldiers in the middle rank remained held horizontally, while the spears of the soldiers in the rear rank pointed diagonally upwards, forming an angled stance. The entire phalanx transformed from a moving millstone into a curled-up hedgehog covered in sharp quills. Defensive formation, I blurted out. Scarface glanced at me. How do you know Dao? I'm guessing, I said. They planted their spears in the ground to stabilize their formation. That way, even if they were charged by cavalry, they wouldn't easily lose their footing. Scarface didn't speak, continuing to stare at Phalanx. After Phalanx completed their formation, silence returned. They stood there, motionless, like a group of bronze statues. Only the occasional breeze, ruffling the feathers on their helmets, proved they were alive. Time passed little by little. The sun rose higher, and the temperature on the Gobi Desert began to rise. Heat waves rose from the ground, distorting the distant scenery slightly. But Phalanx remained unmoved. What are they waiting for? They're waiting for us to make the first move, old Bangzi whispered. Waiting for us to lose our composure, waiting for us to make a mess of things. So we're just going to wait? Xuanzi asked. We can only wait, old Bangzi said. Whoever moves first loses half the battle. So we waited. The garrison soldiers on the city walls, hidden behind the crenellations and inside the watchtower, kept their eyes fixed on the still phalanx, 5 miles away. Sweat streamed down their faces, unwielded. Their knuckles were white as they gripped their weapons. Waiting is the most agonizing thing. Especially when you know that Dao, that still phalanx, could come to life at any moment and become a destructive torrent. An hour has passed. Phalanx remains unchanged. 2 hours have passed. Even Scarface was starting to get restless. He paced back and forth in the watchtower, stopping every now and then to gaze into the distance. What exactly are they trying to do? A military officer couldn't help but ask. Waste. Scarface uttered a single word. Waste our patience, exhaust our strength, exhaust our food and water. It's noon. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the rammed earth of the city walls was so hot it could bake pancakes. The garrison soldiers' lips were cracked, but none dared to go down for a drink. What if the enemy attacked while they were down there? Phalanx remains unchanged. They seem to have taken root in the Gobi Desert, becoming a part of that land. By afternoon, the sun had begun to set in the west. Phalanx has finally moved. It's not that we're moving forward, it's that we've parted ways. The enormous phalanx appears to have been cleaved by an invisible knife, dividing into 3 smaller phalanxes. Each phalanx contains approximately 2,000 people, arranged in a triangular formation. The central phalanx is slightly forward, while the 2 flanking phalanxes are slightly behind. Then they started moving forward again. This time the speed was a bit faster than in the morning, but it still maintained that terrifyingly synchronized rhythm. They pressed straight towards the Great Wall, towards our section of the wall. 4 miles. Sanli. 2 miles. Now, even the expressions on the faces of the soldiers in the front row can be vaguely seen, indifferent, focused, without fear or excitement, as if they were carrying out an ordinary daily task. The tip of the bronze spear gleamed with a blood-red light in the setting sun. Throughout the entire Gobi Desert, only one sound remained, the thunderous thud of tens of thousands of feet stomping on the ground simultaneously. Bang, bang, bang. Every sound felt like it was stepping on my heart. Scarface raised his hand. The crossbowmen on the city wall drew their bowstrings taut. The spearmen gripped their spears tightly. The air solidified. A major battle is about to break out. Scarface's hand did not fall. Phalanx stopped again about 1.5 miles from the city wall. The 3 small phalanxes were arranged in a triangular formation, with the one in front closest to us. The setting sun cast their long shadows onto the Gobi Desert, making them look like 3 giant tombstones. Then, phalanx in the middle moved. Not the entire phalanx, but only the very first few rows, about 200 or 300 people. They broke away from the main formation and continued advancing. The rest of phalanx remained stationary, as if observing. This is, Xuanzi, his voice tense, pressed against the watchtower's observation post, a test. Scarface stared at the small team that had broken off. Send a small group first to test our strength. The small squad advanced faster than the main formation, yet maintained its orderly ranks. Carrying spears, their bronze armor reflected a dark red light in the setting sun, making them look like a group of metal monsters crawling out of hell. The distance was decreasing step by step. 1 mile. Half a mile. 300 steps. We've entered crossbow bolt range. Scarface's hand was still raised. He squinted, watching the approaching squad, as if calculating something. 200 steps. Crossbowman. Scar's voice was deep and steady. Target, front row spearman. Fire. His hand finally fell. On the watchtower, more than 20 crossbows fired simultaneously. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of crossbow strings snapping mingled together. More than 20 arrows whistled through the air, tracing a long arc. Dao's brief arc fell towards that small team. My eyes were fixed on the trajectory of the arrow. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the arrows twirling in the air, their fletchings trembling, their bronze arrowheads gleaming coldly in the setting sun. They flew 200 paces, and then it was nailed to the ground. Most of the arrows missed. Only 4 or 5 hit the target, but the effect was terrible. An arrow struck a soldier's shoulder armor and bounced off with a clang. Another arrow pierced the shield. They were holding a round shield with their left hand, protecting half their bodies. A third arrow hit the leg armor, but it only got stuck in a gap in the armor plates and caused no real damage. Only one arrow pierced through the gap between a soldier's shield and helmet, embedding itself in his neck. The soldier swayed but did not fall. He simply reached out, pulled out the arrow, and continued forward. A crossbowman cursed, "Are these guys really that thick-skinned?" "It's not that the skin is thick," old Bangzi said, "it's that the armor is thick. Look, arrows bounce off it." The squad paused for a moment. They looked down at the arrows on the ground, then looked up at the city wall. Then they continued on their way. Their steps remained synchronized. "Change to armor-piercing arrows." Scarface roared. Armor-piercing arrows were among the few remaining in the camp. Their arrowheads were longer, thinner, and sharper, specifically designed to penetrate armor. However, their quantity was limited, with each crossbowman receiving only 3. The crossbowman hurriedly changed to armor-piercing arrows and reloaded. "That squad has already moved 150 paces. Fire!" Scarface gave the order again. The second round of crossbow bolt launches. This time the effect was much better. At least 7 or 8 arrows pierced the bronze armor. I saw a soldier's breastplate pierced, the arrowhead protruding from his back. He staggered a few steps and fell. Another soldier was shot in the thigh, the arrow piercing deep. He knelt on one knee but was still trying to stand up. But that team didn't stop. They bypassed their fallen comrades and continued forward. The formation remained well maintained, even tighter. They held their shields higher and stood closer together. 100 steps. Now you can even see their eyes peeking out from under their helmets. Blue, gray, and light brown. There's no fear in those eyes, only a cold, focused intensity. Fire! Scarface gave the order for the third time. This time it wasn't a crossbow bolt, it was bows and arrows. Behind the crenellations below the watchtower, 50-odd archers stood up, drew their shortbows, and unleashed a volley of arrows. The arrow rain was denser, but less powerful than that of the crossbow bolt. Most arrows were blocked by shields or deflected off armor. Only a few arrows struck unprotected areas, the face, arms, and calves. Several more soldiers fell, but that squad was less than 80 paces from the city wall. What are they trying to do? Xuanzi's voice trembled. With so few people, they dare to attack the city. I can see it. They are not going to attack the city. They are test our range, the power of our arrows, and our reaction speed. And how high and how strong our city walls are. Sure enough, the squad stopped about 50 paces from the city wall. They stopped advancing, planted their spears in the ground, and held their shields in front of them, forming a small defensive formation. Then, they began to observe. The soldiers in the front ranks peered through the gaps in their shields, carefully observing every crenellation and watchtower on the city wall. The soldiers in the back ranks looked up to measure the height of the wall and estimate the difficulty of climbing it. "They're drawing a map," I whispered. "What?" Xuanzi didn't hear clearly. "They're taking notes," I said. "They're noting where it's easy to attack, where it's difficult, where there are many arrows, and where there are few." The squad observed for about 15 minutes. During that time, we fired several more volleys of arrows, but they were well protected behind their shields, so their casualties were minimal. Then they began to retreat. Instead of turning and running, they maintained their formation and retreated step by step. Shields were always held high, facing the city walls, and spears were always raised, ready to deal with any possible pursuit. They retreated with great composure. When they had retreated 100 paces, they stopped and observed for a while longer. When they had retreated 200 paces, they quickened their pace and withdrew from the formation. Throughout the entire process, the discipline was outrageously strict. "Is that all?" a crossbowman asked blankly. "It's over." Scarface lowered his hand, which he had been holding up. "They've finished testing." The sun had completely sunk below the horizon, leaving only a dark red afterglow. A wind picked up over the Gobi Desert, whipping up sand that stung my face. After the small squad withdrew to the main formation, the three phalanx began a general retreat. They retreated as orderly and slowly as they had come, until they were 5 miles away before setting up camp again. The city wall was deathly silent. No one cheered, no one celebrated. Everyone understands that we didn't gain any advantage in that confrontation. We fired hundreds of arrows, but only felled fewer than 10 enemies. And they, with a small-scale probe, figured out our strengths and weaknesses, range, power, wall height, and defensive density. "Everyone, get out of here." Scarface broke the silence. "Eat when you're hungry, rest when you're tired. Double shifts tonight." The garrison soldiers silently descended the city walls. Each of them wore a solemn expression. I walked at the back, glancing back at the camp in the distance. The phalanx soldiers were already cooking over a fire. The flickering flames in the twilight resembled a group of eyes opening in the darkness. Back in the earthen house, Xuanzi slumped onto the straw mat and let out a long sigh. That scared me to death. I thought a real fight was going to break out. Today is just an appetizer. Old Bangzi squatted in the corner, rolling his tobacco. Tomorrow, or acquired, will be the main course. The main course. Xuanzi's face turned pale again. They only sent 200 or 300 men today. Old Bangzi lit a cigarette and took a puff. Next time, it might be 2,000 or 3,000, or even more. No one spoke inside the room. The only sound was the hissing of Old Bangzi smoking. I lay on the straw mat, closed my eyes, and replayed every detail of the confrontation in my mind. The soldiers, reaction speed, their discipline that disregarded casualties, their frighteningly calm tactical execution. This is not an equal battle. This is a case of a professional army overwhelming an amateur defender. Our 200 or so men were those amateur guards. "Xiao Fan," Xuanzi suddenly asked, "do you think we can hold out?" I didn't open my eyes. "I don't know, Dao," I said. "But I know the answer in my heart. If things continue like this, we won't be able to hold on. It's absolutely impossible to hold on." The day after the Macedonia squad withdrew, a sense of unease permeated the entire camp. It's not fear, it's something worse, resignation. Morning exercises were cancelled, and the work on the city wall was halted. The garrison soldiers huddled in small groups, squatting at the base of the wall and beside the barracks, talking in hushed tones. The conversations were all the same. Yesterday's probing, how many arrows we fired, how many of them died. Then came a long silence. Even Scarface stopped cursing. He stood on the watchtower, gazing at the quiet enemy camp 5 miles away, for the entire morning. I know what Dao is thinking. I'm thinking about it too. A mental calculator seemed to be clicking away. Yesterday we fired over 300 arrows, a third of our stockpile. They probably died less than 10, and were wounded a dozen or so. At this rate, once the arrows ran out, they'd still have over 9,000 left. We had no other options but to throw stones and jump down to fight hand to hand. There weren't many stones. The area around this section of the city wall was all sand and soil, and large stones had to be moved from the riverbed 2 miles away. The time it took to move one stone was enough for them to walk 100 steps. Hand-to-hand combat. Never mind, I don't want to think about it anymore. Xiaofan, Xuanzi squatted down next to me, scribbling on the ground with a stick. Do you think we'll be able to wait for reinforcements? I didn't answer. No one has asked that question since yesterday. After lunch, Scarface gathered everyone in the drill ground. He stood on a broken wooden crate, looking down at the 200 ashen faces below. Last night, I sent someone east, Scarface said, his voice hoarse, to the nearest beacon tower to deliver a message. If all goes well, the news should reach the BD Commandery camp in 3 days. If all goes well again, reinforcements may arrive in 7 or 8 days. No one spoke. 7 or 8 days. Can we hold out for 7 or 8 days? I know what you're thinking, Dao, Scarface continued. We didn't fight well yesterday. Our arrows were like tickles. But I want to tell you. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. They are human, not made of iron. No matter how thick their armor is, they are still vulnerable to swords and axes. No matter how well organized their formation is, they are still vulnerable to chaos. What's the mess? Someone asked from below. Scarface fell silent. He didn't know Dao either. Just then, a string in my mind suddenly tightened. Every scene from yesterday's battle flashed before my eyes like a revolving lantern. The soldiers, orderly steps, the heavy spears, and the land beneath their feet. Gobi Desert. It appears flat, but it hides deadly dangers. I remember what I saw during reconnaissance, a dry riverbed east of the camp, with soft sand and gravel on both banks. The riverbed extended eastward, leading right to a gap in our section of the Great Wall. At the foot of the city wall, there are gullies carved out by rainwater, which, though not deep, are covered with pebbles. And that section of the city wall that was washed away by a flash flood last year and hastily repaired afterwards. The foundation is already loose, and there are several cracks in the rammed earth wall. That team saw all of this yesterday. They must have written it down. So if we, Centurion, I heard my own voice, not loud, but exceptionally clear in the silent training ground. Everyone was looking at me. Scarface looked at me, his brows furrowed. Qin Xiaofan, just say what you have to say. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. The thoughts that had been swirling in my mind for days suddenly seemed to find an outlet, rushing in all at once. Yesterday they tested the strongest section of the wall. I took a step forward and raised my voice slightly. There were many watchtowers, the crenellations were dense, and the ground was relatively flat. That's why they suffered few casualties. Scarface didn't speak, waiting for me to continue. But they will definitely come back, I continued. Next time, they won't choose the hardest place to fight. They will choose the easiest place to fight. For example, Scarface asked. For example, the section 5 miles to the west that was washed away by a flash flood last year, I said. The city wall there is low, the gap is large, and the foundation is loose. Also, in front of that section of the city wall, there is a dry riverbed with soft sand on both sides. Whispers arose from the crowd. So what? A veteran asked. They've chosen an easy place to fight, aren't we in a worse position? Not necessarily. I shook my head. They chose easy locations because they thought they were easy to fight in. But what if we make those locations difficult to fight in? How will it change? Scarface stared at me. I took a deep breath and said, I've seen that section of the riverbed. The surface is hard soil, and half a foot below is loose sand. If we dig a pit in the riverbed overnight, it doesn't need to be deep, just a foot and a half will do. We can put sharpened wooden stakes at the bottom of the pit, then cover it with a thin layer of soil and sprinkle sand on top, so it looks the same as the surrounding area. The crowd quieted down. And, I continued, the foundation at the breach in the wall is loose. We can dig some shallow trenches along the base of the wall, and fill them with gravel and sharpened logs. If they try to climb the wall, or run into it, they'll lose their footing. They'll go around it, the veteran interrupted me. You think you can stop a large army by digging a few holes? What a joke. It's not about blocking them, I said, it's about disrupting their rhythm. Centurion just said their formation is vulnerable to chaos. Phalanx is all about perfect formation and synchronized steps. If someone in the front row suddenly steps into a hole, falls, or twists their ankle, the rest of the line has to stop. And if they stop, the formation scrambles together. At that point, I looked in the direction of Watchtower. Our crossbow bolt is more accurate at shooting stationary targets than moving ones, right? The drill ground was completely silent. Everyone was looking at me with complicated expressions. Scarface jumped down from the wooden crate and walked up to me. Go on. And then there's the defense on the city wall. I pointed to the distant city wall. We've divided the people evenly among the sections, but there are only so many watchtowers and crenellations. We can't fit more people in there. How about we concentrate the people in a few key positions? For example, add 10 crossbows to each of the watchtowers on either side of that breach. And prepare more rolling logs and stones on the wall directly above the breach. What about the other places? A military officer asked. Aren't the other places being defended? Plant flags elsewhere, I said. Make lots of flags, even rags will do, tie them to long poles, and plant them all over the city walls. From a distance, it will look like there are many people guarding there. They tested us yesterday and know roughly how many of us there are. But if they see twice as many flags on the walls as yesterday, they'll think we have reinforcements. Xuanzi interjected. At the very least, they will have doubts, I said. In war, the worst thing is inaccurate intelligence. The more they doubt, the less likely they are to attack. That's all I have to say. The drill ground was so quiet you could hear the wind. Scarface stared at me for a long time. His eyes seemed to be weighing something, weighing my words, weighing me as a person. How do you know all this about Tao? He finally asked. I got stuck. How do I know about Tao? Because I've read history books. Because I know about Tao. Macedonian phalanx's weaknesses. Because I've seen too much, form over substance, packaging in modern society. I was just thinking offhand. In the end, all I could say was, I just felt, we can't just fight head on, we have to use our brains. Scarface remained silent for a while. Then he turned to the crowd and asked, did you all hear that? Everyone nodded. Do you think it's feasible? Scarface asked. No one spoke. I think it's feasible, Old Bangzi suddenly said. He slowly walked out from behind the crowd, squatted down, and grabbed a handful of soil. The soil in the Gobi Desert has a layer of sand underneath, so it's easy to dig a hole. There are plenty of stake camps, just dismantle a few broken vehicles. Flags, tattered clothes, broken tents, if you put them together, you can make dozens. He stood up and looked at Scarface. That kid's right. If we fight head on, we won't last 3 days. If we use some tricks, we might be able to hold out for a few more days. Scarface nodded. Let's get started, he said. From now on, we'll split into 3 groups. Group 1, go to the western riverbed and dig a pit. Group 2, go to the breach in the city wall and dig a ditch. Group 3, make flags. He paused, then looked at me. Qin Xiaofan, you go with Old Bangzi to the riverbed. How many pits to dig and how to arrange them is up to you. I was stunned. I'm in charge. Yes. Scarface stared at me. You came up with the idea, so you're the one who has to dig the pit. If you don't dig it well, before the enemy falls in, I'll bury you in it first. A few low laughs rang out from the surrounding area. But the laughter no longer contained the despair that had preceded it. Something quietly changed in the void. People started moving. They found tools, divided into groups, and discussed the details. Their voices grew louder, and their steps quickened. I stood there, still a little dazed. So, it's been accepted. What are you still standing there for? Old Bangzi patted me on the shoulder. Let's go, let's dig a hole. I followed him, along with about 20 other people, carrying shovels and pickaxes, and walked towards the western riverbed. On the way, Xuanzi leaned close to me and whispered, Xiaofan, you're really something. So many people didn't think of that, but you did. I gave a wry smile. What's the use of having an idea? It has to work. It will definitely work, Xuanzi said. I've heard Old Bangzi say that the Zongnu people sometimes dig traps to catch wild horses. If a person steps in one, they suffer even more than the horse. Yeah, I looked up at the enemy camp in the distance. What are those Macedonia soldiers doing now? Eating, sleeping, or are they also planning how to flatten this little section of the Great Wall? Never mind, let's dig the pit first and figure things out later. Digging the hole was harder than I imagined. The soil on the riverbed was hardened by the sun. A single blow with a pickaxe would only produce a white dot. Old Bangzi told us to splash water first and wait for the soil to soften before digging. The water was carried from the camp and was very precious. Each person only received half a bucket. Use it sparingly. Old Bangzi squatted by the riverbed, touching the soil with his hand. Sprinkle a layer of water, dig a layer, then sprinkle water again, and dig again. The pit doesn't need to be too deep, but it needs to be wide enough that at least one person can fall in sideways and not climb out. There were about 20 of us, scattered along a section of the riverbed. Shovels and picks flew up and down, digging out soil shovel by shovel and piling it up beside us. Soon, everyone's hands were covered in new blisters. Xiao Fan, Xuanzi wiped his sweat. The pit he was responsible for had already dug up to his knees. Do you think these pits will really work? I stared at the pit taking shape before me. It was 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 1.5 feet deep. In my plan, such a pit would allow at least 2 or 3 soldiers in the front ranks to step in simultaneously. If they were carrying spears and wearing heavy armor, it would be difficult for them to get up quickly after falling. I don't know, I said honestly, but it's better than doing nothing. That's true. Xuanzi nodded and continued digging. I looked up and around. In the riverbed, about 20 garrison soldiers were all working diligently. No one complained, no one slacked off. The rustling of shovels digging, the dull thud of picks striking the hard earth, and the heavy breathing blended together, becoming the only sounds in this Gobi desert. In the distant camp, 2 other groups were also busy. Beyond the breach in the city wall, people could be seen digging trenches at the base of the wall. Others were carrying rubble and sharpened wooden stakes to fill the trenches. The group making the flags spread out a large pile of rags and even a few old sheepskins in the open space of the camp. Several skilled garrison soldiers were using bone needles and hemp thread to sew these rags together and tie them to long poles. The resigned atmosphere of yesterday has disappeared. Instead, there is a kind of busy calm. At noon, Scarface came to inspect the area himself. He walked around the riverbed, checking the depth and width of each pit. When he came to the pit I had dug, he squatted down and measured it with his hand. "It's too shallow," he said. "Dig at least half a foot more." "But the soil is too hard." I pointed to the bottom of the pit. "It's all loose rocks below, we can't dig it out." "If you can't dig it out, use a chisel." Scarface stood up and pointed to an old soldier next to him. "Old Chen, go teach him." Old Chen walked over, holding a short-handled chisel and a small hammer. He jumped into the pit, squatted down, aimed the chisel at a rock at the bottom of the pit, and gently tapped it with the hammer. "Like this," Old Chen said as he tapped, "we can't rush it. The stone is hard, and the harder you hit it, the slipperier the chisel will become. We have to tap along the cracks in the stone and chisel it open little by little." I watched him. Old Chen's hands were steady, each strike landing precisely on the end of the chisel. The stone slowly cracked under his hands, breaking into small pieces. "You give it a try," Old Chen said, handing me the tools. I jumped into the pit, and following his example, squatted down and aimed at another rock. My first strike went astray. The chisel slid off course, leaving a white mark on the rock. "Gently," Old Chen said, "feel the texture of the stone." I took a deep breath and aimed again. This time I tapped lighter, and the chisel sank steadily into the crack in the stone. I tapped a few more times, and the stone split open. "That's right." Old Chen nodded and climbed out of the pit. "Do it like this. It's okay to go slowly, but make sure it's done properly." I continued chiseling at the stone. The clanging of the hammer against the chisel echoed through the riverbed. Each strike made my hands numb, but watching the stone crack little by little and the pit deepen slowly gave me a strange sense of peace. We worked until the afternoon, when the sun was at its strongest, and old Bangzi told everyone to take a break. We hid in the shade of a few clumps of withered bushes on the riverbank, drank water, and ate our dry rations. Old Bangzi, a young garrison soldier, asked, "Have you ever seen such an orderly enemy in all the battles you've fought?" Old Bangzi took a sip of water and shook his head. "Never seen them. Zongnu people are wolves, swift as the wind, harassing and raiding. Yueji people are leopards, fierce but undisciplined. But these people are like mountains, slowly pressing in, flattening everything. So, if we dig these holes, will they be able to block the mountain?" Another person asked. "We can't stop it," Old Bangzi said, "but we can make the mountain stumble. When the mountain stumbles, that's our chance." "What opportunity?" "A chance to survive." Old Bangzi looked towards the enemy camp in the distance. "That's how war is. If you're strong, I'll hide. If you show a weakness, I'll take a bite. Even if I can't kill you, I'll make you feel pain. When you feel pain, you'll hesitate. And when you hesitate, I can live a little longer." He spoke casually, as if he were talking about what to eat today. But the underlying logic in his words silenced everyone. Yes, it's not about winning. The goal is to live. Living a little longer is living a little longer. After resting, everyone continued working. No one asked questions like, "Can we hold them off?" anymore. The shovels dug harder, and the pickaxes swung more fiercely. One by one, the pits took shape, forming a hidden trap zone on the riverbed. Before wrapping up work in the evening, Scarface came again. This time he brought several men with him, carrying more than a dozen sharpened wooden stakes. "Once the pit is dug, insert these," Scarface said. "Pointed upwards, at an angle. If someone falls in, they'll be pierced right through the sole of their foot." I looked at the wooden stakes. Each one was as thick as an arm, with one end sharply pointed, gleaming a stark white in the setting sun. That's ruthless. But none of us who dug the pits thought it was cruel. We silently took the wooden stakes, jumped into the pits, and began setting things up. The pit I was in charge of had been dug up to waist deep. I planted 3 wooden stakes at an angle at the bottom of the pit, with the pointed ends facing upwards, then covered them with a thin layer of the excavated soil, and finally sprinkled a layer of fine sand from the riverbed on top. After I finished, I stepped back a few paces to take a look. It's almost impossible to tell there's a pit here. The surface soil blends in with the surrounding riverbed. Only by crouching down and looking closely can you notice the slight difference in soil color. That's called insidious. Old Bangsy walked over, squatted down to take a look, and grinned. I like it. By the time we finished work and returned to camp, it was almost dark. Smoke rose from the campsite, and the aroma of millet porridge mingled with the smells of tung oil and sweat, filling the air. The trenches on the other side of the breach in the city wall have also been dug. Several shallow trenches lie across the base of the wall, filled with rubble and sharpened logs. The group making the flags has already produced more than 30 flags, actually just rags tied to long poles, but from a distance, they do look quite convincing. The atmosphere at the campsite completely changed during dinner. Death Cheese heavy silence was gone. The garrison soldiers sat together, drinking porridge and chatting. They talked about the funny things that happened while digging the holes that day, who accidentally fell into their own hole, and how sharp the wooden stakes were. Some people even made jokes. My pit is so deep that it can easily trap 3 barbarians at once. What's that compared to what I dug? There are 5 stakes stuck in the bottom. If you fall in, you won't be able to climb out. Do you think those white barbarians will curse when they step in? You wouldn't understand even if I swear. Laughter erupted. I sat on the edge of the crowd, holding my bowl, watching it all unfold. At this time yesterday, these people were filled with despair, thinking they were doomed. Today, however, they are discussing how to make the enemy suffer an even more gruesome death. What has changed? It wasn't my quick wit. It was my quick wit that gave them a goal, something they could do. When people realize they can still do something, instead of just waiting to die, courage returns. Xiao Fan, Xuanzi said, bringing his bowl closer, the hole you dug today was really good. Even old Bangsy praised you. He was just saying it offhand. I shook my head. It wasn't just a casual remark, Xuanzi said seriously. Old Bangsy rarely praises people. He said that the pit you dug was tricky, and the angle of the wooden stake was just right. If someone fell in, their foot would slide forward and pierce their calf. I was taken aback. I hadn't really thought that far ahead, I just inserted it by feel. And, Xuanzi lowered his voice, Scarface also praised you. Scarface? I asked in surprise. He's too busy cursing me to even think about it. Really? Xuanzi said. This afternoon, while you were working on the riverbed, Scarface was watching from the watchtower. I heard him say to an officer, Qin Xiaofan, that kid, though a bit eccentric, his ideas are actually pretty reliable. Reliable. The word coming from Scarface's mouth was the highest praise imaginable. I took a sip of the porridge. It was already cold, but it warmed me up inside. In the distance, the last rays of the setting sun disappeared below the horizon. The Gobi Desert sank into darkness, with only a few flickering lights remaining in the direction of the enemy camp. They're preparing too. They're preparing to flatten this small section of the Great Wall, and flatten our 200 or so people. But when I looked around at the garrison soldiers, chatting and laughing, these people with blisters on their hands, dirt on their faces, but with a renewed light in their eyes. Suddenly I feel that maybe we can hold on for a few more days.
Thanks for watching my video. Please like and share it.